Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. We were on day 6 of a 9-day mission off the coast of Vanuatu, southeast side of the Banks Islands. Nothing dramatic, just a standard acoustic survey. I was there to run hydrophone drops over a trench we'd mapped on a prior trip, something like 6,500 meters deep, never properly profiled. Our vessel, Alcyon, was a small, retrofitted research ship, barely 50 meters bow to stern, 6-person crew. Just enough room for bunks, a cramped galley, and one workstation with sonar and data feeds. The rest was deck space for deploying the winch and gear. We were all tired. The heat hadn't let up since we left Port Vila. Humid, windless days, warm rain at night. Everything felt damp. That morning, I dropped the hydrophone just after 700. We'd marked a spot about 3 miles off the shelf where the seafloor dropped fast. No seismic activity reported there. No known vents or faults. Just depth. Quiet, empty depth. The device hit full descent after 20 minutes, and I powered up the monitor. Normally we get background noise, biological chatter, occasional whale clicks, distant ship engines, but this time we picked up something else. It was a hum. Low frequency, maybe 18 hertz, well below human hearing, but the display caught it clear, uniform, unmodulated, and steady. Not pulsed like sonar, not variable like marine engines, it was too clean, too perfect. We logged it and let the hydrophone sit for 6 hours. The hum never fluctuated. No Doppler drift, no distortion. It didn't respond to movement either, didn't echo or react to the line tension shifting, just a constant vibration in the water. Even weirder, the hum wasn't traceable. We triangulated twice, then 3 more times. Each time the origin moved, only slightly, but just enough to throw off the math, almost like it was repositioning itself by meters every hour, but always staying out of direct alignment. By nightfall, it was still going. I reeled up the hydrophone and ran a final sweep. The hum faded once the sensor broke 3,000 meters, like it hit a wall. We marked the cutoff, noted the anomaly, and stored the rig. Dinner was quiet. Nobody said much, but everyone had noticed the vibe shift. Ollie, the deckhand, made a joke about giant refrigerators down there, but nobody laughed. We shut down the main systems around 22:30. Generator was on low to keep refrigeration and nav lights going. The sea was flat, not even a breeze. It was warm enough that I slept with the hatch cracked. That night, we drifted 5 nautical miles. We had no engines running, no active propulsion. The drift didn't match the tide or prevailing currents. Our instruments didn't log any external force. No wind, no swell, no sudden shift in ballast, just movement. And none of us woke up. Except for Kat. She was the youngest on the crew, early 30s, marine biologist from Wellington. Smart, sarcastic, always up early with coffee before anyone else. But that morning, she wasn't in the galley, wasn't in her bunk either. We found her up on the aft deck, curled into the port railing, barefoot. Eyes open, not blinking. Her lips were slightly parted, but she wasn't speaking. Her pupils were fully dilated. I waved a hand in front of her face, snapped fingers. Nothing. I checked her pulse. It was normal. Breathing slow but steady. She wasn't asleep. She was just absent. We got her down to the infirmary cot and kept her warm. About an hour later, she blinked once and took a deep breath like surfacing from deep underwater. She didn't seem scared at first, just exhausted. She didn't speak right away, just stared at the ceiling. When she finally talked, she didn't mention being outside. She didn't even know she'd left her bunk. She said she'd been dreaming of water, but it wasn't wet. That was her phrase. It wasn't wet. She described being in a space where everything looked like it was made of liquid, but it didn't behave like liquid. No drag, no sound, just shimmering surfaces and dark shapes moving behind them. She said there were no lights, but everything glowed. No walls, but she couldn't move. She kept saying, there was something watching, but not from the outside. We asked her to explain. She just shook her head and started crying. We ran a full physical on her. No signs of stroke, no concussion. We called into the Maritime Health Line and gave them her vitals. They told us to keep her under observation, monitor for seizures. Around noon, she vomited seawater. We hadn't been in the water, Nobody had. She hadn't even been topside long enough to ingest spray, and there was no salt on her skin. But the stuff she threw up was unmistakably briny. Thick, almost gelatinous. It stank of decay like something scooped from below the photic zone. We bottled it and froze a sample. The rest we dumped. I checked the navigation logs again. Between 000 and 400, we moved 5.3 nautical miles northwest. No engine activity, no anchor drift, no changes in water current data. Our GPS track looked like it had been erased and redrawn manually. Not smooth like normal drift, just segmented, almost artificial. The timestamps didn't line up. At 0317, there was a 30-minute blank in the log. Not a power failure, just nothing. Like the system had kept running, but stopped recording. Later that day, I reviewed the deck cams. At 0302, the bow camera went white. Not blinding, just fully white, like fog. The lens wasn't obscured, there was no glare, no directional light, just a clean, featureless white screen. That lasted for 6 minutes. Then the feed cut. When it resumed, Kat was already on deck, lying on her side. No footage of her walking out, no footage of the doors opening. The other cameras, port and starboard, showed the same whiteout. All of them at the exact same time. Then darkness. Then back to normal. All systems rebooted themselves. That night, nobody slept. I stayed up watching the horizon. It was dead calm again. Not a sound, not even gulls. The hum we'd recorded that morning wasn't present anymore. I dropped the hydrophone just in case, but the water was quiet. The next morning, Kat seemed better. Pale, but alert. She didn't remember much. Said she'd had a dream about sinking, but in reverse, like being pulled upward through pressure. She asked why her bunk was wet. We hadn't told her about the seawater. I checked her mattress. The sheets were dry. Her pillow, though, smelled faintly of brine. We ended the expedition a day early. By the time we docked, we were all jumpy. Even Ollie stopped making jokes. We logged everything with the university, handed off the recordings, filled out incident reports. Kat got blood work done. Clean. No signs of hypoxia, infection, or neuro issues. They told her she might have had a dissociative episode, but that doesn't explain the 5-mile drift, or the seawater, or the whiteout on the cameras. I still have a copy of the hum recording. I've played it for audio engineers, biologists, even a friend who works with offshore oil rigs. Nobody's been able to pin it down. It's not tectonic, not mammalian, not mechanical. And when I run a frequency analysis, the spectrogram shows something I can't explain. A repeating notch like a signature. It cycles every 47 seconds. It's not a sound, it's a gap. Something is removing that part of the signal. Perfectly. Every time. I was out in the yard digging out some stubborn roots along the fence line when I heard it the first time. Just my name. David. Plain and calm. Almost like someone just walked up behind me and said it. I turned around, thinking maybe it was my neighbor, Jess, from 2 houses down, but there wasn't anyone there. Just the wind in the trees and the sound of the shovel dropping. I stood still for a second, listening. Nothing. I figured I imagined it and went back to work. This was early June, not too hot yet, but humid. We'd just gotten a few days of heavy rain, so everything smelled like wet grass and mud. I'd been putting off yard work for weeks and finally had a free Saturday. I had my phone inside charging, so no music or podcasts, just me and the shovel and the occasional bird overhead. Maybe 20 minutes later, I heard it again. David. Same tone, same distance, but there was no one around. My house backs up to a small wooded area. Not deep enough to call a forest, but enough trees that you can't see through it when the leaves are thick. I walked to the edge and looked around. Nothing moved. No birds now, no wind either. That kind of stillness that feels like everything's holding its breath. I stood there a while, staring into the trees. Then I just said, "Hello?" out loud, like an idiot. No response. I went back to work. But after that, I kept glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. That night, I told my wife about it. Katie laughed and said maybe I was dehydrated. I didn't argue. I had skipped lunch. The next day was a Sunday. I was out again trimming back some overgrowth near the shed when I heard it a third time. Same voice, same distance, like someone standing 6 feet behind me, calm and clear. David? I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the hedge clippers. Still no one. This time, though, the dog heard it too. Our black lab Benny was sitting on the deck, and the second I turned around, he stood up and stared in the same direction I was looking. toward the woods. Not barking, not growling, just alert. I walked to the tree line again, scanned the whole area. I didn't go in, but I stood there a long time, waiting. I didn't hear it again. That evening, I set up my old digital voice recorder, one of those little handheld ones from the early 2000s. I used it back in college to record lectures. It still worked. I put in fresh batteries, hit record, and clipped it to one of the deck posts. Katie rolled her eyes when I told her, "So what, now you're ghost hunting?" I told her it wasn't like that. I just wanted to see if it was a neighbor messing with me or something. I let the recorder run all afternoon while I worked in the yard. That night, after dinner, I plugged it into the laptop and started skipping through the audio. Mostly just wind, birds, a few passing cars. Then, around the 38-minute mark, I heard myself grunt. I think I was pulling weeds near the back corner. A few seconds of silence. Then, David. It was quieter than I remembered hearing it in person, but it was definitely there. Not a whisper, not creepy sounding, just calm, like someone trying to get my attention. The hair on my arm stood up. I kept listening. 10 seconds after the voice, there was something else. A second voice. Different tone. Higher pitched, but faint. Like it was coming from farther away. It said, "We're still trying to bring you back." I replayed that part maybe 10 times. Katie thought I was messing with her. She accused me of editing the audio. I told her I didn't even know how. I'd never used any kind of audio software in my life. She eventually shrugged it off. "It's probably some radio interference," she said. "Or you picked up a conversation from someone walking by." But it wasn't radio. It was in the yard. The second voice was almost like it wasn't meant to be heard, like it got caught accidentally. I let it go for a few days, went back to work, tried to act normal, but that line stuck in my head. "We're still trying to bring you back." Back from what? That Thursday, I was mowing the lawn when I saw something in the woods. Not a person, not really a shape even, just this shimmer, like heat rising off pavement, but vertical and motionless. It was be 20 feet into the trees. I stopped the mower and stared at it. It didn't move, didn't change shape, just stood there like a ripple in the air. Then Benny started barking, loud, frantic. I turned around to quiet him, and when I looked back, the shimmer was gone. The next morning, Katie found me sleepwalking in the backyard. I'd left the back door open and was standing barefoot on the grass, staring into the trees. She said I was mumbling something, but she couldn't make it out. I don't remember any of it. After that, I moved the voice recorder into the house. I started sleeping with it running on my nightstand, just in case. The second night I did that, I caught something else. Around 3:40 a.m., the audio gets staticky. Not loud, just a little distorted, and there's this short burst of what sounds like electronic beeping. Right after that, there's a voice. Not mine, not Katie's. Just a single word, "waiting." That was it. No more sleepwalking after that, but I started having these really vivid dreams. Or maybe not dreams. I'd wake up feeling disoriented, like I'd been somewhere else. Not scary, exactly. Just off. One morning I found dirt on my feet. Just a light dusting, like I'd been standing barefoot on dry soil. But the floor was clean. No sign of where it came from. I started keeping my shoes next to the bed. Kept the doors locked, windows shut. Didn't help. Twice I woke up with new scratches on my arms. Parallel, thin, like from brambles. But I hadn't been in the woods. I hadn't gone anywhere. Katie didn't notice anything. She thought I was stressing over work. She told me to take a few days off, go fishing or something. I almost did. I packed a bag one Friday, drove halfway to the lake, then turned around. I didn't want to be far from home. That weekend, I set the recorder outside again, just for a few hours. When I listened back, I heard something new. Not a voice, but a sound. A hum. Low, steady, like a transformer buzzing in the distance. Then, clear as anything, we weren't finished. I don't remember recording that. I don't remember anything happening that day. Just a regular Saturday. Katie asked me to stop with the recorder after that, said it was making me paranoid. I agreed, put it in a drawer, and left it there. But sometimes even now I still hear it. Usually when I'm alone, out in the yard or lying awake in bed. Not every night, but often enough. Always the same voice, calm, familiar Dave. I set up the time-lapse on a Tuesday night in mid-September. Skies were clear, no moon, pretty ideal for stargazing. I was out behind my place in Driftwood, Texas, kind of a scrubby hilltop that backs up to some ranch land. There's not a ton of light pollution if you face away from Austin, and I built a little platform out there with a level mount and power for my gear. I'd just gotten a new camera, a ZWO ASI 533, and I wanted to test it on a longer sequence, something like 6 hours. I mounted it on my Skywatcher tracker and pointed it towards Cygnus. I wasn't trying to catch anything in particular, just wanted to see how the noise looked on the sensor over time. Everything was routine. I calibrated the mount, triple-checked polar alignment, locked down the intervalometer to shoot one frame every 15 seconds. Started the sequence at around 8:20 p.m. and left it running through the night. Next morning, I woke up around 6 and went out to bring the gear in. Nothing seemed off. I dumped the images onto my desktop and let them compile into a time-lapse while I made coffee. I wasn't even planning on watching the full thing, just skipping around to check for clouds or motion blur. I started scrubbing through it around 8 a.m., just a standard star field. The Milky Way drifted slowly across the frame, satellites here and there, a couple of faint meteors. But then I noticed something strange. There was a single point of light, bright, steady, not blinking, just above the frame's bottom right corner in the first few minutes. At first, I assumed it was Jupiter or maybe Vega peeking in, but as the frames progressed, that point didn't follow the rest of the sky. Everything else moved left to right, as expected with the Earth's rotation. But this one, it moved the other way. Not fast, really slow. Like, if I hadn't had it sped up 200x, I wouldn't have noticed at all. But frame to frame, it was drifting against the starfield, just a hair at a time. I thought it might be a plane, but it didn't blink. No strobe, no color shift, no tail, and it stayed in frame for almost 40 minutes. That's way too long for a plane, or even a satellite on a weird orbit. I backed up and watched again, slower this time. You could see it make these tiny directional changes, not enough to jump, just a subtle wobble, like it was correcting itself. The path wasn't perfectly smooth. About halfway through the sequence, the object stopped moving entirely, just sat in one spot for maybe 8 minutes. No fade, no blinking, no shift. Then it started drifting again, same speed but at a slightly different angle. I checked the tracking logs from the mount. It was running perfectly. No skips, no errors. If the mount had misaligned or stalled, the whole frame would have shifted. But all the stars stayed solid, which means the tracker was working fine. The rest of the footage was normal. Around 2:10 a.m., the point of light exited the top left of the frame, and that was it. I exported a clip of just that portion around 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. and played it again. This time, I noticed something else. At about 12:34 a.m., the object dimmed for a few seconds. Not flickered, dimmed, like someone turned down a dimmer switch and then brought it back up. The background stars didn't change at all, so it wasn't the atmosphere. I froze the frame where it was dimmest. It wasn't totally dark, still faintly visible, but it had dropped way below everything else in the scene. Then it slowly brightened back to its original intensity, steady as before. I zoomed in as far as the resolution allowed. Still just a point. No shape, no halo. Just a pure white pixel. I checked the sky databases next. Starlink paths, ISS passes, Iridium flares. Nothing matched the location or time. It wasn't in any cataloged flight path or satellite log for that night. Then I went back to my raw images, the individual frames. I found the exact ones where the dimming happened and looked closer. Around that time, something strange happened to the image noise. Every photo in the sequence had a little thermal grain, typical for long exposures. But for exactly 3 frames during that dim period, the background noise changed. The stars got fuzzier. Not out of focus, just softer, like the whole scene had been slightly diffused. After those 3 frames, everything snapped back to normal. I thought maybe dew had formed on the lens, but I checked the dew heater logs. Temps were steady, no condensation warnings. Also, the stars were sharp before and after, so it didn't track. I decided to do a screen recording of the whole time-lapse and send it to a friend of mine, Kyle, who does astrophotography out in Arizona. I didn't give him any context, just told him to watch and tell me if he saw anything weird. He called me about 2 hours later and asked, "What the hell is that point of light doing?" So it wasn't just me. We both tried running the footage through different filters, contrast boosts, exposure curves, color isolations. Nothing changed what we were seeing. Still just that white point slowly drifting in the wrong direction, changing course once, dimming briefly, and then exiting frame. We even checked for bugs. Maybe some weird sensor artifact, stuck pixel, something digital, but it changed position, brightness, and path over time. No way it was just a glitch. Out of curiosity, I checked my backup drive. It auto-logs time metadata from the mount and camera. Everything lined up except for one thing. There was a gap in the log between 1:20 and 6:54 a.m. 46 seconds, just gone. The camera kept shooting through it, and those frames are there, but the control software didn't record any settings or positional data for that window. Like, it just skipped over that period entirely. I hadn't touched anything. I was asleep. I've done maybe 200 overnight sequences out there. That's never happened. I didn't know what else to do with the footage. I didn't want to post it anywhere public. Just kept it on my drive, checked it a few more times over the next week. Every time I came away with the same feeling, like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to notice. I haven't caught anything like it since, but I still run the camera a few times a month. Just in case. I took the Subaru up to Eagles Pass that night because I needed some air. That, and I just picked up a used Canon 6D from a guy in Glenwood and wanted to test the long exposure settings. I like shooting night skies, stars over ridgelines, that kind of thing. I'm not good enough to sell them, but it's something that calms me down. No traffic, no notifications, just the shutter and the cold. I got up there a little after 9:30. The road past the Ranger Gate was still open, even though there was a little snow on the shoulders. It was clear that night. Cold, maybe in the 30s, and dry. Moon wasn't out yet, but the sky was full of stars, sharp and bright like they get at elevation. I parked at the Overlook pull-off, the one with the broken coin viewer and the bench nobody ever uses. No one else was up there. I didn't see a single set of headlights for the last 5 miles. I killed the engine, left the hazards on for a second, then turned everything off. Whole mountain went still. I set up the tripod just off the gravel facing northwest where the trees drop off and you can see the next ridge over. I've shot that spot before. It's perfect for catching Orion and Taurus coming up over the slope. The first couple shots went fine. 30-second exposures, ISO bumped up to 3200, wide open. I didn't have a remote trigger, so I was using the timer to avoid shake. I got a few good ones. Nothing fancy, but you could make out the Milky Way stretching just above the pines. I stood there flipping through them on the screen, mostly just checking focus and exposure. Then I tried a 60-second shot, just to test the noise handling. When it finished, the screen came up black. No stars, no silhouette, no error message, just black. I thought maybe I'd bumped the lens cap or the settings, but everything looked fine. I tried again, another black frame. It wasn't the battery, I checked. It was nearly full. I swapped SD cards just in case, but that didn't help either. The next 3 long exposures came out the same way. Total black. No sensor noise, no hot pixels, nothing. I crouched down and wiped the lens, checked the mount, powered the camera off and on again. It seemed to be working normally. Menus, playback, everything. I tried a regular exposure at 1/10 of a second. That came out fine. Trees, stars, everything. But the long exposures kept failing. I stood up and looked around, trying to see if maybe fog had rolled in without me noticing, or if clouds had covered the sky. But it was perfectly clear. I could see my breath, sure, but the air was still and dry. Stars were bright as ever, and quiet. No wind, no bugs, not even distant traffic. That's when I noticed something weird about the tree line. I'd been looking through the camera's screen so much that I hadn't really noticed it at first. But when I looked out again, just with my eyes, the ridge across from me felt off. I couldn't say why. It looked flatter than it should have. Like the top edge of the trees had been drawn with a ruler. Just this perfectly straight horizontal edge, which I knew wasn't normal. That ridge is jagged. I've hiked it. There's dips and tall pines that break the line, but here it looked smooth, almost artificial. I lifted the camera and pointed toward it. One more 60-second shot. While it processed, I tried to listen for anything. Maybe some machine or a low drone hum. Nothing. Just my own breathing and the tiny tick of the shutter closing. The screen blinked on. This time, there was something there. Stars, yes, but also a row of 5 faint lights just above the tree line. Evenly spaced, small and round, almost like distant aircraft lights, but too still, too level. I stared at the screen for a long time. I hadn't seen any lights with my eyes. I looked up again. Nothing. Just the trees and stars. But in the photo, clear as anything, there they were. I zoomed in. The lights didn't look like reflections or sensor flare. They were dim, like maybe from behind a fogged window, and had a warm white hue, not the harsh blue you get from lens artifacts. They were perfectly in line, no sag or rise, as if whatever they were on hadn't shifted at all during the full minute the shutter was open. I took another shot. The lights were gone. I stood there, just holding the camera, not even reviewing the new photo. I was suddenly aware of how alone I was up there. I didn't want to move. My chest felt tight again, like I was holding my breath without meaning to. Then I heard a sound, very soft, like a pressure change. A single low pop, almost like when you crack your ears after altitude gain. But no plane had gone over, no wind had started up, just that faint pressure shift and then silence again. I turned around and looked toward my car. It was maybe 20 feet away, sitting dark and quiet. I took a few slow steps toward it, not running, just needing to be near it. When I got to the door, I opened it, sat down, and shut it behind me. I didn't drive away right then. I just sat there, camera still in my hands, engine off, watching the tree line through the windshield. Every few minutes, I'd look down at the screen again, flip back to the one photo with the lights. It looked exactly the same each time. 5 lights. Faint, steady. Steady. Nothing else around them. I don't know how long I sat there before I started the engine. Probably close to an hour. I didn't see any other cars on the way down. No animals, either. Usually you see deer near the switchbacks, or at least hear owls. When I got home, I pulled the files onto my laptop. Every photo looked normal, except that one. The metadata showed the same exposure settings as the others. No corruption, no weird timestamps. Just one 60-second frame with something in it that wasn't before or after. I didn't edit it. I didn't post it anywhere. It's still on the drive in the folder from that night, just labeled with the date. I haven't been back to Eagles Pass since. I'd been messing around with my ham radio setup one late Saturday night, just trying to get a better handle on the whole thing. My name's Mark, and I live out near Flagstaff, Arizona, which, for the record, is one of those spots where the sky is so dark at night it feels like space is right on top of you. Perfect for radio and stargazing, but also, as I'd learned, for some weird stuff you can't quite explain. I'd just finished dinner and was sitting at my workbench in the garage. The radio gear is all pretty old school, nothing fancy, mostly stuff I pieced together over the years, antennas I built myself, and a couple of receivers. I'm not a pro by any means, just a guy who likes the quiet and the challenge of picking up signals. I usually listen to weather stations or chat with folks in nearby states, but that night I decided to try scanning some of the higher frequencies, the kind that don't get a lot of traffic. After tuning for maybe an hour, I caught something strange. It wasn't a normal signal like Morse code or any of the standard digital transmissions I'm used to. Instead, it was a rhythmic pulse, steady, almost like a heartbeat, but mechanical and deliberate. Not random static or interference either. It repeated in a pattern that was close to Morse code, but off enough that I couldn't make sense of it. I leaned closer, adjusting the squelch and fine-tuning the receiver. The pulses kept coming, steady and persistent. I grabbed my logbook and started noting the times and signal strength. Something about it felt oddly deliberate, like it was trying to communicate but not in any language I recognized. I decided to figure out where it was coming from. Using the directional antenna I built, I began a slow sweep, turning it in small increments and watching the signal strength meter. The pulse got stronger as I turned the antenna toward the southern sky, then southwest, then straight up. That's when I stopped and sat back. The strongest signal wasn't coming from any terrestrial source, it was coming from directly overhead. I repeated the sweep a few times, triple-checking my setup. Same result every time. The pulses were strongest when my antenna pointed straight up, as if the signal was coming from something above the atmosphere. That didn't make sense. I mean, I've heard plenty of stories about signals from space, but nothing that came through on my kind of equipment like this. I even tried changing bands and frequencies, but the pulse was only on one particular frequency, one I hadn't seen used before. I called my buddy Jerry. He's a fellow ham operator, lives a few miles down the road. Told him what I was hearing and what I'd found. He was skeptical, said it was probably interference from a satellite or some weather balloon. But neither of us could explain why the pulse was so rhythmic or why it wasn't any familiar code. We agreed to meet the next night with our gear and try to pinpoint it together. That evening, the sky was clear, crisp, with a light wind that made the desert scrub rustle softly. Jerry showed up with his setup, a more powerful receiver and a notebook filled with charts and frequencies. We set up on my back patio, away from the house lights. We tuned in. The pulses were there, as steady as ever. Jerry aimed his antenna upward and the signal peaked. I adjusted mine to the same angle, and we both confirmed it was strongest directly above us. Jerry joked about aliens, but his usual smirk wasn't quite there. There was a weird silence between us, like the night was holding its breath. After a while, I noticed something else. The pulses weren't perfectly consistent. They'd speed up and slow down slightly, like a breathing rhythm. It wasn't just mechanical, it felt organic. We spent hours tracking it, and during that time I kept glancing at the sky. No aircraft, no satellites in sight, no flashing lights or anything moving. Then around 2 a.m. something shifted. The pulses faded, then stopped entirely. I looked up and I swear the stars seemed brighter, sharper, but something was off. The air felt thicker. There was a low hum, almost too quiet to notice, but it was definitely there. Jerry got up and stretched. He said maybe the source moved on or the signal stopped for a break. I wasn't so sure. As we packed up, I saw a faint glow near the horizon, pale and bluish, hovering low above the distant mountains. It wasn't a plane or a weather balloon. It was too steady and low, like a spotlight from some invisible machine. We didn't say anything about it at first. Jerry just nodded and said maybe it was a power station or a flare. I wasn't convinced. That night, I couldn't sleep. The signal, the glow, the hum, it all kept cycling in my head. I kept wondering if I'd heard something not meant for me, or if something was watching us through the radio waves. Over the next few days, I tried listening again. The pulses never came back. The sky was normal. The glow didn't show up again. I checked all the usual sources. Local airports, government stations, space agency updates. Nothing matched what I'd heard or seen. Sometimes when the night is quiet and I'm alone in the garage with my radio gear, I catch myself staring at the antenna pointed at the sky, waiting for the pulse to return. And it hasn't, but I still wonder what was up there that night, making those strange rhythms just for a little while, high above my head, out of reach. I was driving west on Highway 95 about 30 miles south of Tonopah. It was just past midnight. I'd left Ely earlier that evening after a late dinner with my cousin, and I figured I'd stop in Beatty for the night. I wasn't in a rush, just didn't feel like staying over. The road was quiet, no other cars for miles, and the only light came from the dash and my high beam stretching out over the cracked blacktop. I've done that drive more times than I can count. I used to run deliveries out that way, sometimes even slept in the truck if I didn't feel like finding a room. That stretch near the test range is always kind of eerie, even when nothing weird's going on. You can drive for hours without seeing a gas station, and the desert feels empty in a way that's hard to explain. Anyway, I was sipping from a warm bottle of water, half listening to some old AM station fuzzing in and out, when I noticed the lights. 3 of them, almost straight ahead in the sky, maybe 30 degrees up. They were small, bright white points, but clearer than stars. I figured they were aircraft at first, flying in some kind of formation. That wouldn't have been unusual out there with all the military stuff nearby. They moved slowly. Perfect triangle, equidistant. I kept expecting one to blink or bank, or for there to be engine noise, but there was nothing. No sound, and they didn't flash, just solid white. I turned the radio off and cracked the window, trying to hear anything. Wind, jets, rotor blades. But there was nothing except the tires on pavement. The odd thing was how steady they were. Commercial planes usually drift a little or wobble in formation. These didn't. They held the exact spacing for at least 5 minutes while I kept glancing up at them. They weren't following the road exactly, but they were staying roughly parallel. I slowed down a bit, trying to get a better look. At some point, I pulled over onto the shoulder and shut the engine off. Total silence. I stepped out of the truck. The lights were still there, maybe a little lower now. Then, out of nowhere, they split. Each one darted off in a different direction. One shot left, one up, one straight back. They moved so fast, I barely tracked it. No curves, just instant movement. They were gone. I stood there, trying to process what I'd just seen. I thought maybe it was some kind of test aircraft, drones maybe, but I've never seen anything move like that, especially not without any sound. It wasn't until I turned back toward the truck that I saw they'd come back. Same 3 lights, same triangle formation, exactly where they'd been before. That part freaked me out more than the scattering. I hadn't seen them return. I was looking right in that part of the sky. No movement. They were just suddenly back. I got in the truck, turned the key, and drove. Didn't floor it or anything. I didn't want to draw attention, but I wanted to put some distance between me and whatever that was. I kept checking the mirrors and glancing up through the windshield, but the lights stayed where they were for a while. Just tracking, it seemed like. Never closing in. Never fading out. Then they blinked off again. Not moved. Just off, like someone flipped a switch. That was the last I saw them. About 10 minutes later, my dash clock reset. Just flickered out, then came back with the wrong time. Something like 4:11 a.m., which didn't match my watch or phone. The odometer had reset too, like I'd just turned the truck on for the first time. That kind of thing doesn't usually happen while you're driving. I pulled into Beatty around 1:30 and checked into one of those little motels across from the gas station. The guy at the desk gave me a weird look. Said I looked pale. I told him I'd had a long drive. In the room, I sat on the bed for a while with the TV on mute, just trying to go back through it all in my head. I didn't fall asleep until the sky started getting light, and even then, it didn't feel like I really slept. I flipped the last omelet of the morning shift when I heard the tray go clatter behind me. I looked up to see it sliding back onto the counter, perfectly clean, silver sheen intact, as if someone had nudged it into place. The tray was meant for the west wall section, where security staff ate in shifts. It had breakfast burritos, fruit, coffee, all of it untouched. I frowned and called out, "Hey, you changing your mind?" No answer. Normally someone would call back or shuffle in. Nothing. The air smelled faintly metallic, like licking a coin. I shrugged it off as a glitch and moved on to refill the scrambled eggs. Over the next week, it happened 4 more times. Trays returned untouched. The smell always lingered, tinny, cold. Some days it was easy to think I'd misheard the buzzer or misread the order ticket. But then there was the table. I was wiping down the long cafeteria table near the windows, those huge panes that look out over Groom Lake, when I noticed 3 dark patches. Hand-shaped and scorched, about the size of a grown man's palm, pressed into the formica surface. No burns on the floor beneath, nothing on the ceiling. Just the smooth, matte tabletop. My heart thumped. I radioed maintenance. They came, poked around, shrugged. "Must be a chemical spill," they said, testing the surface with some gadget that lit up green. I watched them log it as a cleaning issue. Nobody mentioned the handprints. By evening, a supervisor had them wiped off and repainted over so quickly I couldn't even catch the paint code they used. Something changed after that. My coworkers went quiet. Chef Tony, who always hummed opera while he stirred soup, stopped whistling altogether. Lynn, the dishwasher, kept glancing over her shoulder when she took out the garbage. And I caught the new sous chef, Mara, staring at the door like she expected someone to burst in at any moment. The next day, I heard whispers in the pantry, low voices talking too fast. I cracked the door, expecting to catch them on break, but it was empty. Just the hum of the walk-in cooler and the distant clang of plates in the dish pit. That night, I left late, rolling my cart back to the walk-in. The hallway lights flickered, and the freezer door groaned as if on its hinges. I flicked on my flashlight and tried to laugh at myself. "After all this time, Greg," I muttered, "you still jump at shadows." I reached for the freezer handle, saw my breath fog the beam, and froze. On the floor in front of me were 2 more hand-shaped scorch marks, smaller this time, like a kid's palms, pressed into the vinyl tile. No scorch pattern on the fridge door, no melted linoleum anywhere else. I snapped a photo with my phone. The flash lit the whole cold corridor for a second before cutting out. The tiles looked unmarked in the photo. I left the walk-in door open, eyeing the hallway until my cart clattered itself to the kitchen. At the cook line, I texted Tony, "Did you see footprints by freezer? Weird handprints." No reply. The following morning, the freezers were unplugged for routine maintenance, and the hall was sealed off. No one else mentioned it. When I asked the supervisor, he said they'd had some electrical oddities overnight and were taking precautions. By the end of the week, the staff lunch roster was half empty. People called in sick, moved to other posts. Mara gave me a tight smile and said, "I've got a headache." She was gone the next day. One afternoon, I got a request to send dinner trays up to the North Tower. When I got there, the door was open a crack and the room was dark. I stepped in and set down the trays. As I turned to leave, the lights snapped on. 6 chairs sat around a metal table, empty. The trays were back on the counter exactly as I'd left them. The smell was thick, like hot iron. I heard a soft click behind me. The door swung shut on its own. For a moment, I stood there, listening to my own breathing. Then I backed out, tripping over the threshold. The door swung closed again and locked silently. I didn't see anyone else in the hallway. My radio crackled when I called for help. Just static. I pounded on the door until the supervisor's voice crackled through. "Give me a minute." The lock clicked and the door opened inward. I half expected someone to step out, but it was empty. No trays, no scorch marks, nothing unusual except the smell clinging to my clothes. Later that night, I stole a look at the daily logs. Every incident returned trays, handprints, odd power cycles, was logged under operator error. Nobody had reported the hallway marks or the locked door. I felt like I was losing my mind. The kitchen felt too big, the fluorescent lights too bright. Bramble, my dog, refused to come in when I got home, barking at the darkened windows even though there was no shape outside. I closed the blinds on all sides and left every light on. Sleep came in fits. I dreamt of walking through the cafeteria, rows of trays sliding off counters on their own, handprints glowing on every surface. When I woke, my apron was balled on the floor, wet with sweat. I called in sick the next morning and turned in my resignation before dawn. I left the base without looking back, pulling Bramble along the gravel road toward town. The cafeteria stayed behind me, pale and silent under the desert sky, and I knew the smells and the marks would linger long after I was gone. I never thought much about talking about this. Hell, I kept it to myself for years. But it's been sitting with me, nagging at the edges, so here it goes. I'm Ed Harrow. I'm 68 now, retired radar operator, spent most of my career at a military base in Montana, watching the skies for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing fancy, just radar screens, dials, and long shifts staring at green blips. One night, back in '94, I was on the graveyard shift, 3 a.m. to 11 a.m., working alone in the radar room. The base was mostly quiet, just the usual static and some birds or planes passing through. Nothing that ever gave me a second thought. But then something came up that didn't make sense. Around 5:15 a.m., I noticed a blip on the radar far below the altitude range we usually track. I was used to seeing planes between 30,000 and 40,000 feet, commercial jets, military patrols, sometimes satellites when the gear was tuned right. This blip was at about 1,000 feet, hovering in the middle of nowhere. I figured it was a small aircraft or maybe a weather balloon. I kept watching it, expecting it to move or disappear. It didn't. Then, in less than 3 seconds, it rocketed straight up like a bullet, no curve, no slowing, past 70,000 feet. The thing vanished off the screen, right around the edge of the radar's maximum range. I sat back, blinking. My heart was pounding. Nothing I'd ever seen moved like that. I tried to get a second opinion, but I was alone. I double-checked the equipment. Nothing wrong, no glitches. I logged the event in the usual way, then reported it up the chain. What happened next was what really made it strange. My supervisor called me in, calm but serious. He told me that I wasn't to mention the incident again. Not to anyone. No reports beyond the official logs. No questions. I asked why. He said it was classified and beyond my clearance. That was the first time I realized how little I knew about what was really going on. I kept the memory tucked away, didn't talk about it with my family or coworkers. You learn quick not to rock the boat in that line of work. But the weirdness didn't stop that night. About an hour later, I was outside for a smoke break. The sky was still dark, but starting to show hints of dawn. I noticed something odd, an almost imperceptible hum in the air, like a low-frequency vibration. It wasn't from the base or any machines. It felt unnatural. Then I saw a faint glow on the horizon, just above the tree line. It wasn't a star or an aircraft light. It was this pale, steady light, neither blinking nor moving fast. I watched it for a while. It didn't get brighter or dimmer, just stayed there, glowing softly. I tried to call the radar room, thinking maybe there was something new on the screens. The radio crackled, but no one answered. I went back inside. The radar showed nothing unusual. I shrugged it off as nerves, but the feeling lingered. Over the next few days, I kept catching glimpses of strange lights, sometimes hovering near the base, sometimes just off into the distance. They didn't move like planes. No sound, just there. Sometimes I'd hear the hum again, low and steady. I mentioned it once to a colleague. He laughed and said I'd been watching too many sci-fi movies. Then one night, I woke up suddenly. It was about 3 a.m., and the room was flooded with this dim bluish light. I looked out the window and saw a shape hovering just above the trees near the base. It wasn't like anything I could describe. A shape, maybe triangular, but the edges blurred and shifting. I blinked, and it was gone. I wasn't sure if I'd really seen it or if it was a dream. I didn't tell anyone. Years later, now that I'm retired and out of that world, I'm still not sure what I saw. The radar blip that shot straight up, the glowing lights, the hum, maybe some kind of new aircraft or secret tech, maybe something else. I've kept it to myself for so long because there was never a good way to explain it, but it's there. I tracked it. I know what I saw, and that's all I have. I live out in the country about 10 miles west of Ashland, Oregon. It's pretty quiet here. Mostly just me, my dog Luna, and the woods stretching out all around the property. I moved here a couple years ago to get away from the city noise, and I like the peace. The house is small, older, with a big porch that faces west into a line of fir trees and a little clearing where Luna likes to run. The first night I noticed the humming was maybe 3 months after I'd moved in. I'd been up late watching some old movies, and when I finally went to bed, Luna was already curled up at the foot of the bed. Around 2:13 a.m., I woke up suddenly because of this deep, low humming noise. It wasn't like a fan or anything mechanical that I was used to. It was more like a continuous, vibrating drone that felt like it was right outside, but when I looked out the window, there was nothing. I got up, grabbed my coat and flashlight, and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool and still, and the stars were out in full force. No planes or helicopters flying over, no flashing lights anywhere. I shined the flashlight over the clearing, the trees, the driveway. Nothing but the usual shadows and the blackness of the forest. The humming stopped exactly at 2:17 a.m., and when it did, the night was silent again. I figured maybe it was some kind of distant generator or something from a neighbor's property, but I didn't have any neighbors close enough for that. The closest house was about half a mile away through the trees, and none of the other places I knew had anything that made a noise like that. The next night, the same thing happened. 2:13 a.m. on the dot, that low, pulsing hum started. I heard it from inside the house first, the windows rattling a tiny bit. I went outside, but again, nothing visible. It wasn't like a spotlight or anything. Just that vibration in the air. I walked the perimeter of the property with a flashlight, even checked the barn and the sheds, but there was no source. Over the next couple weeks, the humming kept happening every night, same time, same pattern, starting quiet, building up to a steady drone, then fading away 4 minutes later. Luna never barked or seemed spooked, which made me think it wasn't some wild animal or something. One night, after about a week of this, I decided to record the sound with my phone. The audio was strange, almost like the hum had a rhythm to it, pulsing in waves. I played it back the next day, but honestly, it just sounded like a weird, mechanical drone. I sent it to a couple friends who live in town, but no one had heard anything similar. I started noticing other small, odd things too. The night after the humming, Luna would sometimes wake me up around the same time, staring out the window at the trees, stiff and alert. Once or twice, I thought I caught faint flashes of light through the pines, like quick glimmers, though it was probably just a trick of the shadows or distant cars. Still, it made me uneasy. A couple mornings, I found little patches of crushed grass in the clearing, almost like something had landed or pressed down there overnight. No tire marks, no footprints, just these flattened circles. They weren't big, maybe 2 or 3 feet across, and didn't have any other signs around them. I thought maybe a bird or deer had done it, but it looked too precise for that. One night I stayed outside longer, sitting on the porch with Luna. At exactly 2:13, the humming started again, low and deep. I stared out into the clearing and trees, watching for anything unusual. The night felt thicker somehow, like the air was heavier. Then I noticed the wind had stopped completely, which was weird because it had been a little breeze all evening. I kept looking, and about halfway through the hum, I thought I saw a faint glow flicker behind the tallest fir tree at the edge of the clearing. It wasn't a flashlight or any kind of normal light. It was more like a soft, bluish shimmer that moved a little, almost like it was floating. It lasted maybe 5 seconds before disappearing. I blinked, and it was gone. After the hum ended, I called it a night and went inside. Luna was tense for a while, but eventually settled down. The next day, I went out to the spot where I saw the light and looked closely. The ground was just normal dirt and needles. No footprints or marks, just the crushed grass from before. I found a few tiny, almost imperceptible indentations in the soil, smaller than a fingernail and arranged in a weird pattern. They didn't look natural at all. I showed the spots to a neighbor who's been around for decades, but he shrugged it off as nothing, said the forest makes strange shapes sometimes. Still, it didn't feel right to me. The humming kept happening nightly for weeks. Sometimes it felt closer, like the sound was right over the house. Other times, it seemed to drift away toward the woods. I'd try going out and walking around to find the source, but it was always silent by the time I got there. One night, Luna started growling quietly at something behind the house. I went to check but found nothing, just dark trees and thick brush. The air was cold, colder than usual for late September, but there was no wind or movement. I began to notice something else, a feeling that I was being watched. Not just Luna, me. While sitting on the porch or inside near the windows, I'd get this prickling sensation like eyes were on me, even though there was no one around. The last night it happened, I decided to stay awake past the humming, just to see if anything else would show up. I kept the porch light on low and sat with Luna, watching the clearing and the edge of the woods. At 2:13, the humming began, soft at first. I could feel it in my chest, like a low vibration. Then the porch light flickered once, briefly, and the wind died completely. Then I saw it, a shape moving just at the edge of the trees. It was dark, almost blending in, but not quite. It didn't look like an animal I knew. It was too tall, and the way it moved was slow and deliberate, like it was watching me as much as I was watching it. I tried to focus, but after a few seconds, it just slipped behind the tree line and disappeared. The humming stopped, and the normal night noises slowly came back. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I checked the clearing. The grass was flattened again, and those tiny indentations were back in the dirt. I packed up a few days later and stayed with a friend in town for a while. Luna was quieter during those nights, less tense. I never heard the humming again, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear that low drone in the background, like it's waiting. It started about 15 minutes after I left the diner in Hanksville. I'd been staying in an old camper trailer about 5 miles outside town, just off a dirt road that doesn't show up on most maps. Quiet place. No neighbors, no traffic, just the kind of silence you only get out there in the Utah desert. I drove in town that night to grab dinner and some coffee. Around 9:45 p.m., I started heading back. Sky was clear. Cool night, maybe 50 degrees. No wind. I'd taken the truck, an '03 Tacoma with about 200,000 miles on it, and I wasn't in a hurry, cruising along at maybe 45. The road's narrow and a little washboarded in places, but it's straight for the most part. Nothing around but low scrub and open desert. You can see for miles in daylight, but at night it's just black, like driving through ink. About 2 miles from my turnoff, I noticed a light in my side mirror. It looked like a headlight, maybe a single motorcycle behind me. except it wasn't bouncing like it should have been on that kind of road. Just a smooth, steady glow like someone had mounted a flashlight to a camera dolly. I watched it for a while. It kept the same distance, maybe 200 feet behind me, and never gained or fell back. Didn't sway, didn't bob, just stayed dead even with my speed. At first, I figured it was some local out for a night ride, maybe using an aftermarket light bar. But the light was too white, almost bluish. No other colors, no glare, just one tight, solid beam. I tapped the brakes once to see if they'd slow down. Nothing. They matched me. I slowed to 35. So did they. I sped back up to 50. They followed. I leaned over and flipped off my dash lights so I could see better out the rear window. Still just the one white light, no engine sound. I rolled down my window to listen. Nothing but the tires on gravel. About a mile from the trailer, I pulled over, just eased onto the shoulder and stopped. The light didn't stop right away, but it slowed, then coasted to a stop behind me, same distance as before. I sat there a second with the engine running and my hand on the shifter. I looked in the mirror. The light didn't move. It didn't flicker. Just sat there, still dead quiet. I opened the door and stepped out. Left the engine running, headlights on, walked around to the back of the truck and stood there, facing it. The light wasn't attached to anything. No bike, no ATV, just the light itself, hovering maybe 6 feet off the ground, perfectly still. It was the size of a grapefruit. No housing, no visible source, just a ball of white-blue light floating in midair. It didn't cast shadows either. My tailgate was lit up, but there were no sharp edges to the light, like it wasn't really illuminating anything, just glowing. I don't scare easy. I did 20 years flying F-18s off carriers, night ops, cat shots in pitch black storms, but this didn't make sense. No noise, no heat, no structure, just there. I raised my hand and waved. It didn't react. Then I reached for my flashlight in the truck bed. As soon as I moved, the light shifted. Not fast, just a gentle drift to the right like it was watching me from a different angle. I froze. It stopped moving. I stepped back. It stayed where it was. I don't know how long I stood there, a minute maybe. Then it started to move again, but not toward me. It began to rise, smooth straight up. No acceleration, just an impossible climb like it was on an elevator. It went up maybe 50 feet, paused, then shot straight upward. Gone. Just like that. No arc, no fade, just a vertical streak and nothing. No sound. The sky was empty. I got back in the truck and drove the rest of the way home. Didn't even look in the mirrors. Just kept my eyes forward, hands on the wheel. Pulled into the trailer lot, killed the engine, locked the doors behind me. Sat on the couch for an hour with the lights off. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. I know what people think when a guy says he saw a floating light out in the desert. But I wasn't drunk. I wasn't tired. And I've spent my whole adult life around aircraft. I've seen stealth tests, drones, weird DARPA crap that never made it past prototypes. This wasn't any of that. There's no way to explain how something can track you like that. Match your speed perfectly, hover in dead silence, then disappear like a bottle rocket straight into space. I haven't seen it again. But I don't take that road after dark anymore. I drive the long way through the pass now, even though it adds 30 minutes. Feels safer somehow. It started the morning after that big thunderstorm in late August, Thursday, I think. We'd had nearly 2 inches of rain overnight, and the wind tore through like a freight train. I figured I'd lose a few limbs off the oaks again, or maybe get another fence post loosened by the runoff. What I didn't expect was to find half my northern plot looking like a vinyl record got pressed into it. I went out around 6:30, just as the sun was getting high enough to throw light through the mist. That part of Kentucky gets these heavy ground fogs after storms. Everything looked silver, soft. I had a cup of gas station coffee in one hand and my boots half laced, because I wasn't planning to be out more than 10 minutes. Just checking the irrigation lines before the heat came back. I noticed something was off when I walked the first row past the old irrigation pump. The corn didn't look wind damaged. It was flat, but not broken. Not snapped or twisted like you'd see after a big gust, just laid down. Even, like something pushed it gently, with weight, not force. I walked in a little ways, maybe 10 feet, and that's when I saw the shape of it. It wasn't random. The pattern started narrow, swelled in the middle, then narrowed again, almost like a pulse. Not a perfect circle or spiral like those crop circle hoaxes. more jagged, uneven, but still deliberate, like someone mapped a sound wave onto the field and pressed it down with a hand the size of a bus. The stalks were laid over without being bent. I picked one up and it just flopped back down. Leaves still green, ears still intact, like the plant gave up standing for a while but hadn't died. I looked for tracks. Mud was still soft, but there weren't any boot prints, no tire ruts, no sign anyone had walked in or out. Even the field mice hadn't come back yet. I thought maybe hail had done it somehow, or the downdraft from a lightning strike, but there was no scorch, no debris. Just this weird, quiet swath of perfect pressure. 50 feet long, maybe 15 wide. I walked the whole thing. The deeper I went, the more unsettled I felt. There was a kind of silence there I couldn't explain. Deeper than normal. Like the sound of the wind in the rest of the corn didn't reach that patch. My own footsteps sounded muffled. I backed out and went to get the dog. Maple's a mutt, some border collie in her, maybe lab too. Smart, loyal, loud when she needs to be. I figured she'd sniff it out, maybe clue me into what kind of animal could have bedded down there. She wouldn't go in. Stood at the edge of the flattened section and whined. Tail down, ears pinned, just pacing. I gave her space. Tried again 10 minutes later. Same thing. She actually barked at it once, just one sharp bark, then turned around and trotted back toward the house. That's when I started to feel it, a kind of pressure in my ears, like when you're climbing too fast. Subtle, but there. I stood still and just listened. There was a hum, real faint, not from machinery or bugs, lower than that. Almost like the inside of your own head when everything's quiet. But it was external, I'm sure of that. I backed off again, sat on the porch for a bit and tried to rationalize it. Maybe the rain had shifted something underground, pipes, drainage tile, I don't know. Maybe it was an echo from one of the military flights they run out of Fort Campbell, although I hadn't heard any jets go over. I didn't go back in until the next morning. That second day, the air felt normal again, but the shape was still there. Same stalks laid flat, no footprints. The edges were sharp, no gradual tapering, just standing corn, then downed corn like it had been sliced. I brought a moisture reader out. The flattened area was drier than the rest of the field, which didn't make sense after a storm. Like it had been shielded or pressed dry. No scorch marks, no burns, no animal waste. Just that same sound wave shape, still too clean to be weathered. On the third day, I marked the edges with little garden flags, figuring maybe I could come back and measure it more carefully. That afternoon, the flags were gone. Not knocked over, gone. The wire sticks weren't even in the ground anymore. I thought maybe Maple had chewed them, but she wasn't even going near that plot. Wouldn't go past the barn. The weirdest part was that the corn started to stand back up by itself, but only in the center of the shape. The outer part stayed flat. Over the next couple days, the middle rose like something had pushed it down, then let go. By Monday, it was almost gone. You wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I didn't report it. Who do you call for something like that? The sheriff? They'd just blame the storm. And maybe they'd be right. But I've seen storm damage. This wasn't it. I've worked that land since I was 22. I know what deer do. I know how raccoons flatten paths, how coyotes dig. I've had neighbors' kids sneak onto the property and mess with stuff. This wasn't that. Whatever it was, didn't leave trash. Didn't break anything, didn't take anything. It just made a shape, pressed it into the earth like a fingerprint, and then vanished. I was out in my backyard around midnight, setting up my camera to take some shots of the moon. I'd been studying astronomy for a while and liked to practice with my own gear whenever I could. That night, the moon was nearly full, hanging low and bright in a clear sky. I wanted to get some close-up shots of the craters and the shadows across the surface. I'd set up the tripod and attached my DSLR with the telephoto lens. I live on the edge of a small town, so the light pollution isn't great, but the moon's bright enough, it doesn't really matter. I was pretty focused on adjusting the settings, making sure the exposure was right, and waiting for the moon to clear a thin haze that was drifting through. After a few test shots, I switched to continuous shooting mode. My plan was to get a bunch of photos in a row and pick the best one later. I didn't expect anything unusual, just some good pictures to work with. I remember it was really quiet, just the occasional rustle of leaves in a light breeze. I kept an eye on the moon through the camera's LCD, waiting for that perfect moment where the shadows gave the best contrast. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed something moving across the moon's surface in the live view. It was a dark shape, like a shadow, but it wasn't just a spot or a mark. It was definitely something moving. I stopped and zoomed in with the camera's controls to try to get a better look. The shape was big, too big for a bird or an airplane. I thought maybe it was a satellite or some kind of debris, but it moved strangely. The silhouette was smooth, almost oval-shaped, and glided slowly across the bright surface. I kept taking pictures, trying to catch the whole movement. It crossed the moon from one edge to the other in less than a minute, and then it disappeared behind the other side. At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of optical glitch or a smudge on the lens or sensor, so I checked the lens carefully and wiped it down. But when I looked at the photos on my camera screen, the shape was there in every shot, moving in sequence. I downloaded the photos to my computer and zoomed in even more. The shape was definitely consistent, not a blur or artifact. The edges were smooth but distinct. I couldn't find any planes or birds that would show up like that against the moon, especially since the shape was so large. And satellites usually look like tiny dots moving fast, not a dark form crossing the whole face. After staring at the pictures for a while, I felt a little uneasy. It wasn't like the usual astronomy excitement I get. It was quiet but felt heavy, like something watching or moving above me. The next night, I tried to get more pictures, hoping to catch something similar or explain what I saw. The sky was clear again, same setup, but nothing happened. No shadows, no shapes, just the moon, quiet and still. In the days that followed, I kept thinking about the shape. I showed the photos to a few friends who study astronomy too. They suggested things like clouds passing in front of the moon or camera glitches, but none of it fit what I saw in the images. I started paying attention to the night sky more. Sometimes, I noticed strange lights moving silently at odd speeds, too slow for planes, too fast for normal aircraft. They'd hover or shift direction with no sound. But I couldn't get a camera on them, and when I tried to point my telescope, they vanished. One night, I was out late again, just watching the moon without the camera. I caught a faint humming sound, low and distant, almost like a generator running far away. It was so soft I thought I was imagining it. But then, the feeling of being watched came back. I glanced around, but the street was empty. The houses dark and quiet. No cars, no people, only the moon glowing bright overhead. Over the next week, I felt this presence sometimes, like someone or something was just outside my vision, but when I turned, there was nothing there. It was never close, but always nearby. My sleep got worse. I'd wake up sweaty, heart pounding, but couldn't remember any dreams. Sometimes, there'd be moments I couldn't explain, like losing a few seconds or minutes. I'd look at the clock and be unsure if time had passed normally. One night, I left my camera outside on the tripod after shooting for a while. When I checked the footage the next morning, there was a series of shots with the moon, but right before the dark shape appeared, there was a faint shimmer in the air above the treetops behind my yard. It wasn't a reflection or glare. The air looked like it was bending or warping for a moment, just for a second, then returned to normal. After that, I stopped going out late with the camera. It felt like whatever was up there didn't want me to watch too closely. Still, the pictures remain on my hard drive. I look at them from time to time, trying to figure out what I saw, but nothing fits. Just a dark shape moving slowly across the moon, bigger and stranger than anything it should be. And sometimes, when I look up at the night sky now, I wonder if it's still there, watching from somewhere I can't quite see. We were all packed into Jake's backyard just after midnight, sprawled across lawn chairs and blankets, eyes turned skyward. It was the Perseid meteor shower, and he'd invited a small group over, me, Sarah, Luis, and his girlfriend, Maya. Jake's backyard was one of those weirdly perfect little spots nestled in a quiet suburb of Flagstaff, Arizona, surrounded by tall pines that blocked most of the streetlights. It felt like you could see the whole universe if you just stared hard enough. The night was clear but cold, a dry chill that settled into your bones. We'd brought a thermos of coffee and a couple of beers, but mostly we just sat there in near silence, waiting for something to streak across the sky. The air smelled like pine and dust, and Rufus, Jake's border collie mix was dozing, curled up near the fire pit, his ears twitching every now and then. The meteors started coming in small bursts, shooting thin white lines across the sky. I kept catching myself holding my breath whenever one passed overhead. Sarah was lying back on the grass, pointing out constellations like she knew what she was talking about. Luis was trying to get some photos with his phone, but kept complaining the camera wasn't fast enough. Maya was quiet, just watching, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the embers. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, this one meteor, bright, orange, bigger than the rest, appeared near the southwest horizon. It was moving fast, like a firecracker shot into the sky, except it didn't keep falling. Midway through its path, it just stopped. Hanging there, motionless, no fading, no trail, just a bright orange ball hanging against the dark sky. We all froze. I swear, even Rufus lifted his head. For a few seconds, maybe 5, it just stayed in one spot. No flicker, no dimming, just a steady glow. Then, suddenly it shot straight up, like it was reversing or taking off. It accelerated insanely fast, disappearing into the black. Nobody said a word for what felt like a minute. Then Luis laughed nervously, like trying to break a weird spell. "Did you guys just see that?" Jake nodded slowly, eyes wide. "Yeah, that wasn't normal." Sarah looked unsettled, sitting up. "It wasn't a meteor, right? Meteors don't just stop like that." Maya shook her head. "No way." I was trying to make sense of it too, but couldn't. It wasn't like anything I'd read about shooting stars or meteors. The rest of the shower went on like usual. More streaks, some faint ones, some bright, but none like that. No other lights stopped in midair or shot straight up. After maybe an hour, we started packing up, still talking in low voices about what we'd seen. Rufus stayed close to Jake's feet the whole time, acting jumpy like he was sensing something. The next morning, I woke up with a weird feeling in my chest, like something had shifted. I checked my phone for news, but found nothing about unusual meteor activity or anything strange in the area. I texted Jake, and he said he was still thinking about it too. He mentioned that Rufus wouldn't go near the backyard when the sun came up, pacing and growling at the edge of the trees. Over the next few days, none of us brought it up much, but whenever we were together, the memory hung there, silent and strange. Rufus stayed skittish too, sometimes barking at nothing in the backyard or refusing to come inside. I can't say what that light was. I don't know if it was a meteor or something else entirely, but I remember how unnatural it felt. Like the rules of the sky got rewritten for just a moment. And for a while after, I kept looking up, half expecting to see something hanging there again, frozen in the dark. The power went out just after 9 that night. It was one of those blackouts that felt different from the usual ones. No storm, no warning, just everything cutting off all at once. The whole neighborhood went dark, quiet except for the faint hum of generators kicking on nearby and the occasional murmur of neighbors talking through windows. I was sitting in my living room, just finishing up dinner. The lights blinked once, and then nothing. The TV died. The laptop screen went black, and even my phone stopped charging. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed outside, partly because it was odd not to hear any traffic or the usual hum of city life, and partly because I needed fresh air. The street was pitch black, except for the occasional flashlight beams bobbing down the sidewalks. Most houses were dark, their windows just black rectangles against the night. A few neighbors were standing outside, talking quietly in small groups, trying to figure out what happened. I wandered down the block, flashlight in hand. The air smelled cool and clean, like it had been washed by a recent rain, even though I hadn't heard any earlier. I noticed how strange everything felt without the streetlights and porch lights, how the usual colors and shapes dissolved into shadows. Then I looked up. Above the treetops lining the edge of the street, there was a pale blue light hovering silently. It wasn't a spotlight or a plane's navigation light. It was soft, almost like a glow, and it pulsed twice in a slow, steady rhythm. The pulses weren't harsh or flickering. They felt deliberate, like a signal or a heartbeat. The light didn't move. It just hovered there, maybe 50 feet above the tallest tree. It was too high to be anything someone was holding or flying low in a drone. It didn't have the usual blinking red or green lights planes have, no noise, no wings, or shape that made sense. I kept watching, holding my breath without realizing it. The neighborhood noise had faded completely, and all I could hear was the rustling of leaves and my own heartbeat in my ears. Then, almost like someone flipped a switch, the power came back on. Streetlights buzzed alive, windows lit up, and the hum of electricity returned to everything. At the exact moment the lights flipped back on, the blue glow pulsed one last time and vanished. Just disappeared, like it was never there. I looked around. My neighbors were back inside their houses, some still sitting on their porches, laughing about the blackout. Nobody mentioned the light. I walked back home, feeling weird, like I'd just witnessed something I shouldn't have, but also not sure if I really had. Later, I checked my phone to see if there were any reports of unusual outages, but all I found were updates about the blackout. No one else mentioned anything about a glowing light or pulses. I went outside the next night, and the night after that, hoping to see something again, but there was nothing. Just the normal streetlights and quiet trees. Still, I think about that blue light sometimes, hanging there over the treetops, pulsing in the dark. It didn't make sense. It didn't fit any explanation I have, and I can't figure out why it showed up only during the blackout, only for those few moments before everything turned back on. When I was 7, I saw something in the woods behind our house. We lived in a small town in northern Minnesota, not far from the Canadian border. Lots of pine trees, long winters, not much else. Our backyard stretched into maybe 2 acres of dense woods. It was quiet out there, even in the summer. Just wind, birds, the occasional snap of branches. I don't remember what month it was exactly, but there wasn't snow on the ground, so it must have been late spring or early fall. I was playing out back with a little plastic dump truck, just pushing it through the dirt near the tree line. It was getting close to dinner, maybe 5 or 6. The sun was still up, but low. That kind of soft light where everything turns gold. I remember hearing a weird clicking sound. Not like an animal, more rhythmic, like metal tapping against itself. I turned toward the woods and saw this shape just hovering above the ground, maybe 15 feet in. It was white, not glowing exactly, but too bright to be natural. Almost like looking at a light bulb through fogged glass. It didn't move. Didn't make any sound except for that clicking. It wasn't a person. It was too tall, too narrow, and it had no detail. Just this elongated, almost teardrop shape standing upright, perfectly still, a couple feet off the forest floor. I ran inside and told my mom. She was cooking and barely looked up. I kept saying, "There's something in the trees," but she just said it was probably a bird, or maybe the neighbor's dog again. I remember grabbing her hand and trying to drag her to the back door, but she shook me off and told me to wash up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that white shape floating there, silent. I ended up turning my desk lamp on and sleeping with the covers pulled over my head. For weeks after that, I wouldn't go near the woods. Eventually, I stopped thinking about it. Life kept going. I grew up, moved out, bounced around from Duluth to Fargo, then eventually down to the cities. My parents stayed in that same house. Even after Dad passed, Mom kept it up on her own until she had a fall last year and had to move into assisted living. I came up to help clean out the place and get it ready to sell. The house felt smaller than I remembered. The wallpaper was peeling in the hallway, and everything smelled a little like dust and lemon cleaner. I spent most of the first day packing old books and hauling things out of the attic. It was cold, mid-October, and raining just enough to make everything feel soggy. That misty kind of rain that doesn't fall straight down but swirls around like smoke. I stayed in my old room. It hadn't changed much. Same twin bed, same blue carpet. The shelves still had a few of my old action figures on them. I lay there that first night, just listening to the creaks and groans of the house settling. Around 2 a.m., the motion light in the backyard flicked on. I got up and looked out the window. Nothing was moving. No raccoons, no deer. Just mist rolling through the trees, illuminated by the light. I stood there a while watching. Then I noticed something deeper in the woods. Not moving, but visible through the gaps between trees. It was a shape. Tall. Pale. At first, I thought it was a patch of fog catching the light at a weird angle, but it wasn't shifting or blowing around. It just hovered, vertical and still. I leaned closer to the glass, squinting. It was in the exact same spot I'd seen the thing as a kid. I didn't sleep after that. Just sat in bed with the light on, trying to convince myself it was a stump or maybe reflection from something in the yard. But when the sun came up and I looked again, there was nothing there. No stump, no sign of anything at all. That day I drove into town for more boxes. On the way back, I took the long route past the high school and the old gas station, just trying to burn time until dark. I didn't want to be alone in that house again, not after what I'd seen. That evening, I kept every light on. I closed the blinds, locked the doors. Around midnight, I was brushing my teeth when the motion light kicked on again. I didn't go to the window this time. I just stood there in the bathroom, toothbrush in hand, heart hammering. The light stayed on longer than it should have. Almost 2 full minutes before it clicked off. When I finally looked, the yard was empty again. I barely slept. The next day, I went out to the edge of the woods. It was colder, but clear. No mist. I stepped between the trees, just a few feet in. The forest floor was soft, with pine needles. It was quiet. I walked to where I thought the thing had been. 15 feet or so from the house. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but the air felt weird. Charged, almost. Like right before a thunderstorm. The little hairs on my arms stood up. There were no prints, no marks on the ground. But the trees nearby had these faint scorch lines, thin black streaks about shoulder height, running perfectly horizontal. Not like lightning. Too uniform. I went back inside and didn't leave again that day. That night, I slept on the couch with the TV on low. At 3:11 a.m., the screen went black for a split second, then came back on. No sound. I sat up. The house was completely silent. No wind, no fridge hum, just nothing. Then the back door creaked. I thought maybe I hadn't locked it. I stood up and moved toward the kitchen. The door was shut, but the motion light outside was on. And through the thin curtain over the window, I could see that shape again. Bright, featureless, just beyond the porch. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. It hovered there, completely still. No sound, no movement. Just light. Not shining from it. It was the light. Like it didn't cast shadows, it erased them. I don't know how long I stood there. My legs went numb. Eventually, the light clicked off. I pulled back the curtain. The yard was empty. The next morning, I packed up everything I could and drove back to the cities. I told myself I'd come back later to finish, or maybe hire someone local to do it. I haven't been back. The house is still there, unsold. The real estate agent says it's been hard to show. People say it feels off. I don't tell them why. I pulled into the motel just after 10 at night. I'd been driving west all day, cutting across Kansas, and I was too tired to push any farther. The place was called Prairie View Lodge, though there wasn't much of a view, just a gravel lot, a row of rooms with faded numbers, and a buzzing neon sign that flickered vacancy in uneven bursts. The lot looked packed. Every space was taken, trucks and sedans lined up bumper to bumper. But when I walked into the office, the lobby was empty. No sound, no clerk, just the faint hum of the soda machine in the corner. I stood there for maybe a minute before a door behind the counter creaked open and a man stepped out. He looked normal enough, maybe mid-50s, gray hair, plaid shirt tucked into jeans. He didn't say much, just asked how many nights, slid me a key and pointed toward room 12. No mention of breakfast, no Wi-Fi code, nothing. The whole check-in lasted under a minute. Room 12 was at the far end, ground floor. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first. Cleaner, heavy on bleach. The bed was made, the carpet threadbare, the kind of generic art print you see in every cheap motel. The blinds were already drawn tight. I dropped my bag, locked the door, and sat down on the bed. That's when I noticed it. No sound outside. With a lot that full, I expected doors slamming, voices, TVs bleeding through thin walls, but it was silent. I peeked out the window between the blinds. The lot was still full, every car exactly where I'd seen it, but no people, no movement, no curtains shifting in any of the other rooms, just parked cars under the orange glow of the lot lights. I told myself maybe everyone had checked in earlier and was already asleep. That was the simplest answer. I brushed my teeth, got under the covers, and tried to sleep. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound. Not loud, more like a murmur. I lay there, trying to figure out where it was coming from. At first, I thought it was the TV in the next room, but when I pressed my ear to the wall, I realized it wasn't a show. It was voices, dozens of them. Low, muffled, like a crowd talking in another room. I strained to catch a word or two, but it all blurred together. Male, female, old, young, it was impossible to tell. The weird part was the rhythm. The voices didn't overlap like a real crowd. They rose and fell together, almost timed. I knocked lightly on the wall, half expecting whoever it was to quiet down. The voices didn't falter. They just kept going, perfectly steady. That's when I caught it. My own name. Not once, not twice, over and over. My name threaded through the murmur, repeated in the same tone at the same pace. I froze. I hadn't told anyone my name except the guy at the desk. There was no reason the people in the next room should know it. I whispered, "Hello?" Before I could stop myself, the voices stopped, dead silent. I backed away from the wall and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door. I thought about leaving right then, but my car was parked around the side, and I'd have to step out into that silent lot to get to it. After maybe 10 minutes of silence, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd dreamed half of it. I lay back down and pulled the blanket tight. Then, around 3 a.m., it started again. Louder this time. The same chorus of voices muffled through the walls, all saying my name. Not shouting, not whispering, just speaking in unison, steady and calm. I sat up, heart pounding. It wasn't coming from one side anymore, it was both walls, left and right. I covered my ears with my hands. Even then, I could feel it in my chest. The cadence was exact, like a recording played back on loop. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone. No signal, not a single bar. The screen brightness dimmed on its own, flickering before going black. When I tried to power it back on, it wouldn't respond. The voices grew sharper, not angry, not frantic, just clearer, like they'd moved closer to the walls. I thought I heard them from above too, pressed down through the ceiling. Then the lights in the room flickered. Once, twice, then out. I sat in total darkness. The voices didn't stop. They filled every corner, the exact same word, my name, over and over. I don't know how long I sat there. Time felt stretched, wrong. My head pounded and the air felt heavy, almost charged, like the moment before lightning hits. At some point, I blacked out. When I came to, the room was bright with daylight. The TV was on, playing some local morning news. My phone was back on the nightstand, fully charged, even though I hadn't plugged it in. I opened the blinds. The lot was nearly empty. Just 3 cars left, scattered. Not the dozen or more I'd seen the night before. I packed my bag fast. When I stepped outside, the air was still, no breeze at all. The office door was locked, blinds pulled, no one inside. I didn't bother checking out. I threw my stuff in the car and drove straight out of that lot without looking back. That was last year. I still have the motel key tucked in a drawer. Room 12. The plastic tag is cracked down the middle, like it had been bent in half. I don't remember doing that. I was walking back from the barn after putting the lights out, probably close to 11 p.m. The air was cool, and the grass was wet, not from rain, just one of those heavy dew nights. No wind, barely a sound except the bugs and the distant hum of the grain dryers. As I came up toward the house, I noticed something strange in the sky. It wasn't bright. In fact, I almost didn't see it at all, just 3 faint points of light moving together. If I hadn't looked up at just the right angle, I would have missed it. They formed a triangle, not sharp or glowing, just there, dim like stars through thin fog, but in a perfect shape and completely silent. It passed over slow, not like a plane, more like a slow glide. It didn't wobble or change direction, just moved in a straight line from west to east, steady and smooth. I stood still in the grass for a long time, just watching it drift across until it disappeared behind the trees. No noise, no flashing lights, no trail, just those 3 points, and then they were gone. I didn't think much of it right then. I've seen weird stuff in the sky before. Satellites, weird cloud reflections, even military planes doing exercises at night. I figured maybe it was something like that. I went inside, made some tea, sat up for a while with the dog, and went to bed. Next morning, I got up around 5:30, same as always. Took my coffee out onto the porch before starting chores. Everything looked normal at first. Fog hanging low over the backfield, sun just starting to come up. But I noticed the cows weren't in the usual spot near the north fence. Normally they cluster around the hay ring in the mornings. Instead, they were all standing near the far south end of the pasture, the edge that backs up to the woods. At first, I thought maybe something spooked them, a coyote or maybe just a weird noise. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't milling around or grazing. They were just standing still. All of them. Lined up along the fence, shoulder to shoulder, facing the same direction. Not a sound from any of them. Not even chewing. I stopped at the gate and watched for a few minutes. That's when I noticed they were all looking in the exact same direction. Not toward me. Not toward the barn. But off into the woods, southeast corner, where the trees get thick fast. Not a single one turned their head or shifted their stance. I walked down the fence line, trying not to startle them. They didn't react, didn't even flick their ears like they usually do when I get close. I clapped once and a couple blinked, but none of them moved. It was like they were waiting for something. I didn't go into the field right away. I just stood there, feeling wrong. Like I was intruding on something. Eventually, I backed off and went to get the ATV. Figured I'd drive the perimeter and check for signs of anything that might have spooked them. Maybe broken fence posts or tracks. The grass was undisturbed. No prints, no drag marks, no damage to the fence. I circled around the whole pasture and didn't find anything out of place, but the cows stayed put. All day. I went out again at lunch and then around dusk. They'd shifted positions slightly by then, but most of them were still near the same spot, still oddly quiet. A few were grazing again, but the rest just stood there. Same direction, same weird stillness. That night, I sat out on the porch and kept watch. I didn't go to bed. I left the barn lights off and the house lights low. Around 2:15 in the morning, the dog started growling at the back door. Low, steady sound. Not barking, just watching the field through the screen door and growling. I stepped outside and looked up. I didn't see anything at first. The stars were out, clear sky, no clouds. Then I spotted it again. Same 3 faint points in the same triangle shape. This time, it was moving north to south, slower than before, maybe even lower. No noise, no trail. I watched it pass until it was gone again. The cows stayed near the same area for the next 2 days. Wouldn't come up to the barn. Wouldn't eat much either. I tried to herd them up, but they scattered quick and circled back to the same patch near the trees. On the 3rd morning, I found one of the calves standing in the center of the field alone, not injured, just staring off toward the woods. Same direction as the others had been, like it had been left behind or wandered out late. It wouldn't move for almost an hour, even when I walked right up to it. Eventually, things went back to normal. They started grazing all over again, came up to the barn for feed, acted like usual. That southeast corner, they don't go near it anymore. Not even close. And I've stopped going out after dark. I grew up in Rachel, Nevada. Yeah, that little dot on the map that everyone associates with Area 51. I never thought much about the whole alien stuff until it started happening right outside our back door. I lived there with my wife, Jenny, our kid Sam, and our dog Nellie, a German Shepherd mix who was usually calm but had this sixth sense about things. It was late spring, just after sunset. The desert was cool for once, the wind barely stirring the sagebrush. We were sitting on the porch when Nellie suddenly stiffened. She wasn't barking or whining, just frozen, staring up at the sky. At first, I thought she was watching a plane or a helicopter, but there was nothing obvious. Above the hills behind our house, where the desert just stretched out toward Groom Lake, a tight cluster of stars seemed to pulse. It wasn't like blinking or twinkling like stars normally do. It was more like a slow, rhythmic brightening and dimming, almost as if the whole group was breathing. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was some weird afterimage or my tired brain playing tricks. Jenny noticed it too. "That's not normal," she said, squinting. Sam just sat quietly, his face turned upward. Nellie's hackles raised. She growled low, a deep rumble that didn't sound like any dog I'd heard before. Usually, she was protective but friendly. This was different. She kept growling, pacing in tight circles on the porch, ears pinned back, eyes locked on that pulsing cluster. I tried to shrug it off, telling Jenny it was probably some kind of optical illusion or atmospheric thing. But I kept staring, and the movement of those stars wasn't subtle. They shifted position slowly, like they were moving closer together, then spreading out, but not in any way I'd ever seen from a plane or a satellite cluster. That night, I barely slept. Nellie stayed close, pacing at the foot of our bed, alert to sounds I couldn't hear. Early morning came with a heavy stillness in the air. The next few nights were worse. The cluster pulsed every evening, getting brighter. Nellie's behavior became more erratic. Sometimes she'd bark sharply at nothing, other times she'd just freeze and stare. Sam tried to convince us it was aliens, but we laughed it off, not wanting to scare him. Then, about a week later, it happened. I was in the kitchen around 11:30 p.m., getting a glass of water, when I caught a strange glow through the window facing the hills behind the house. Jenny and Sam were asleep upstairs. Nellie sat at the back door, ears perked, tail stiff. The glow grew brighter, an eerie, pale blue light that didn't flicker or move like a fire or a flashlight. It hovered just over the ridge, about a mile away, casting a faint light across the rocks and sparse desert scrub. I stepped outside, squinting into the dark. The glow was steady and low to the ground. Then I noticed the low hum, a vibration in the air that made my skin prickle and my teeth feel gritty. It was a sound, but not really noise, more like a pressure that settled into your bones. Nellie started barking violently, a sharp, urgent sound that woke Jenny and Sam. Jenny rushed down in her pajamas, and Sam followed, rubbing sleep from his eyes. We all stood on the porch watching. The light wasn't moving, but pulsed gently, matching the earlier cluster's rhythm. Suddenly, a dark shape took form just beyond the ridge, a smooth, rounded silhouette that seemed too big to be any animal or vehicle I'd seen in the desert. It had no visible lights or markings, just that pale glow reflecting off its surface. Nellie went ballistic, snarling and snapping at the air. We had to hold her back. Then, without warning, the shape slowly lifted off the ground, making no sound except that low hum, which grew louder as it rose. The craft didn't speed away or shoot up. It hovered, then moved silently across the ridge and disappeared behind a thicker line of hills. After it left, the desert fell eerily silent. Jenny commented on a strange, sharp scent, like ozone mixed with burnt rubber, that lingered in the air. I stepped closer to where the glow had been and noticed patches of scorched earth, the soil cracked and dry, as if something had baked it from underneath. We stayed outside for a long time after that, just listening. Nellie refused to calm down. She paced the yard for hours, staring at the hills, growling low, refusing to settle. The next morning, I went out with a flashlight and examined the scorched patch. It wasn't large, maybe 8 or 10 feet across, but it looked like something heavy had pressed against the earth and left a burn mark. No footprints or tire tracks nearby. That week, the pulsing cluster vanished. The strange low hum didn't come back. Nellie calmed down a little, but she still watched the hills as if waiting. We told a few people in town, mostly the locals who had stories about strange lights around the base, but no one said anything new. I keep thinking about that night. The way the light moved, the smell in the air, and Nellie's reaction. I'm sure of one thing. Whatever it wasn't something normal, and it wasn't here to visit. But it never came close enough to really see, and maybe that's why I'm still here, telling you this. I didn't mean to start watching the security footage so obsessively. It just kind of happened after the first time I noticed something weird. I'd installed the cameras on my house a few years back, mostly for peace of mind, nothing fancy, just the basics. Motion detection, a few angles around the yard, the front door. Usually it was just the occasional raccoon or a cat passing through. But then about a month ago, I started seeing this low, dark shape at the edge of one of the camera's views, always at exactly 3 a.m. At first, I thought it was a glitch or maybe a shadow cast by the streetlight down the road. The shape was always on the far right edge of the frame, just barely visible, almost like it was slipping in and out of view. It didn't move much, just sort of hovered there. I didn't think too much about it until I saw it again the next night. Same time, same place. I pulled up the footage from every night to see if it showed up before, and it did. Every night for about 3 weeks. Always at 3 a.m., always that same vague shape. Sometimes it seemed to stretch out longer, other times it looked shorter, but it never came fully into frame. It was just there. I live alone out here on the edge of town, and while it's quiet, it's not completely deserted. The streetlights and my porch light are the only sources of light at night. The rest is dark trees and grass. I didn't hear anything odd during those nights. No strange noises, no footsteps or voices. What freaked me out most was how precise it was. Like someone had a timer set. The shape didn't wander around or drift off, just stayed low and close to the ground, right at the edge of the camera's sight for exactly a few minutes. Then it vanished, like someone stepping back into the shadows. I couldn't tell what it was. It wasn't a person. No arms or legs visible. Not an animal either. The way it stayed so still felt unnatural. I wondered if it was some kind of trick of the light or a bug on the lens, but the footage was crystal clear otherwise. One night, I tried to catch it in person. I set my alarm for 2:50 a.m., sat by the window with the curtains pulled back. When 3 came around, I waited and watched that exact spot. Nothing. No shape, no shadow, nothing. The streetlight lit the area the same as always. The only difference was me waiting there, half dreading what I might see. The next morning, I checked the footage again just to be sure. And there it was. That same dark shape, like it had been there all along, even though I didn't see anything from the window. That was the first time it really got under my skin. How could it be visible on camera, but not to me standing right there? After that, I started sleeping with the blinds closed and the lights on, but the shape kept showing up. Always 3 a.m., always at the same spot. A few nights later, I thought I heard something outside. A low humming noise, very faint, almost like a vibration in the air. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. I froze, listening hard, but when I looked out the window, everything looked normal. No lights, no movement. I couldn't tell if the noise was coming from outside or inside the house. That same night, the security camera caught something else weird. The shape was there again, but this time it seemed to shift slightly forward, almost as if it was leaning or stretching toward the camera for a moment, then pulled back. I watched it frame by frame. I swear it was deliberate. I considered calling someone, the police or a local security company, but there was no threat I could point to. Nothing was stolen, no damage to the property. Just this weird, shadowy shape that came out every night, not quite visible, not quite hiding. It felt like it was watching me, or waiting for something. The fact that it showed up when the rest of the neighborhood was dead silent didn't help. The house felt colder at night, even with the heater on. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking toward the window, expecting to see it out there. One morning, I woke up and realized I'd lost about 30 minutes of time. I checked my phone. I'd set an alarm for 6 a.m., but I didn't remember hearing it. My mind was fuzzy, like I'd blanked out or fallen into a weird kind of sleep. I tried to recall what happened right before I fell asleep, but everything was hazy. That day, I spent hours going through the footage again, and I noticed something subtle I'd missed before. Every time the shape appeared, the clock on the video feed would briefly flicker and glitch, like a tiny jump or a skip, just for a second. I don't know if it was a camera glitch or something else, but it felt connected. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like something was just beyond the window. I'd hear soft noises, scratching or rustling, but when I looked, nothing was there. The backyard was empty, but the feeling stayed. One night, I tried putting a flashlight in the yard, aiming it toward where the shape usually showed up. The next morning, the battery was dead. I never saw what drained it, but it happened after the shape appeared. Eventually, I stopped watching the footage all the time. It was messing with my head. But I kept checking the cameras, hoping to catch something different, some clue. Nothing ever changed. The shape came out like clockwork at 3 a.m., stayed low, stayed at the edge of the frame, never fully there, never leaving tracks or signs outside. After a few weeks, the shape disappeared completely. No more glitches, no more strange noises. The nights went back to normal quiet and my sleep got better. I never saw the shape with my own eyes, only on the camera. I can't say what it was or why it came around every night. But for a while, it felt like something was just out there, watching, waiting in the dark, right at the edge of sight. It was around 3:15 in the morning, middle of a long haul between Laredo and Phoenix. I'd pulled out of El Paso a couple hours earlier and was deep into that stretch of I-10 where the road flattens out and everything just kind of blurs into empty desert. No towns, no exits, just headlights and blacktop. I'd stopped at a rest area back in Sierra Blanca to stretch my legs and take a piss. Checked my watch before getting back in the cab, 3:09. I remember that because I was trying to decide whether I'd make it to Lordsburg by sunrise or not. Anyway, traffic was non-existent, just me and whatever was on the radio. I had the window cracked a little for fresh air and was nursing a gas station coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. The road was dead quiet, except for my engine and tires humming along. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't headlights or anything like that. It was a single orb, glowing kind of bluish white. Hard to say how big it was, but maybe the size of a basketball. It came from the right side of the road, low, maybe 10 feet off the ground, and crossed directly in front of my truck. Fast, but smooth. It didn't bob or dip, just a steady horizontal glide. No sound. I hit the brakes, not hard, but enough to slow down, just out of reflex. It was close, maybe 40 yards ahead, and gone in 2 or 3 seconds. It crossed the road and disappeared into the dark on the other side. No flash, no trail. Just blinked out into the scrubland. I sat up straighter, blinked a few times, thinking maybe I'd just imagined it. But my heart was going a little faster, and I noticed my arms had goosebumps. I coasted for a bit before easing back on the gas. When I passed the spot where it had crossed, I slowed down again and looked out the side window. There was nothing. Just rocks, low brush, and blackness. No fences, no utility poles, no towers. I rolled the window down all the way and leaned out. No sound, no wind, just empty. I looked down at my dashboard clock and it said 3:13, which didn't feel right. I glanced at my watch again, 3:19. I frowned, thinking maybe my dashboard clock had just reset or something, but I'd checked both earlier at the rest stop and they'd matched. I remember checking because I'd been thinking about calling my wife and wanted to make sure it wasn't too late. The dash clock and my watch were both at 3:09 when I left. Now they were 6 minutes apart. I tapped the clock, thinking maybe it was a glitch or bump in the road, messed it up. But it was digital and locked in. I turned on my dome light, double-checked my wristwatch. Still 3:19. I remember holding my wrist up toward the dash like I was waiting for them to sync back up or something, but they didn't. I drove a little while longer, just trying to shake it off. Told myself it was just a weird coincidence. The light, the clock, maybe I'd zoned out for a minute. But that didn't sit right. I hadn't been tired, and 6 minutes isn't zoning out. That's a full-length song. That's 2 exits. That's enough time to know something's off. I kept glancing at the sky after that. I don't usually do that when I'm driving. It's just stars or clouds, and you've got to keep your eyes on the road. But I couldn't help it. I'd look up between billboards and check the rear view every now and then, like I expected to see that light again. I didn't. About 30 minutes later, I passed a mile marker and realized I was making better time than I should have been. Not by much, maybe 6 or 7 minutes. But still, it lined up too clean with the missing time on the dash clock. I checked both again. Wrist said 3:47. Dash said 3:41. I drove the rest of the way into Lordsburg without stopping, pulled into the truck plaza and parked. I got out, walked around the rig, checked the tires, just needed to do something with my hands. Everything looked fine. No dings, no dents, no weird scorch marks or whatever I half expected to find. Inside, I bought another coffee and made a dumb joke to the cashier about being the only one alive on that highway. She just nodded, like she'd heard worse. I thought about mentioning the light, but didn't. Not sure why. I just didn't want to hear her tell me it was probably a drone or swamp gas or whatever. Back in the truck, I synced the dash clock to my watch manually. It stayed in sync the rest of the trip. But I think about that light a lot. Not just how it moved or where it went, but that quiet, that totally dead silence when it passed. I drive through the desert all the time, and it's never completely silent. There's always some wind, a rattle, an engine hum, but right then, nothing. Like the whole stretch of road held its breath. And those 6 minutes. I don't have a good reason for why the dash clock lost time, but the watch didn't. Or why it was only 6 minutes. Or why it happened right when that thing flew by. I have seen all kinds of weird crap on the road. Accidents, people walking barefoot in the middle of nowhere, animals staring at you from the brush. But this was different. This didn't feel like something I was supposed to see. I woke up in the middle of the night and immediately knew something was off. It was too quiet. My apartment always has this low background hum, fridge, old ceiling fan, a bit of noise from the hallway, but everything was dead silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like your ears are plugged. I sat up and looked at the clock by my bed. The screen was black. I tapped it a few times, then reached over and hit the lamp switch. Nothing. Power was out. The only light was from the moon coming in through the window, kind of hazy, like there were thin clouds outside. I grabbed my watch off the nightstand, one of those basic analog ones, and checked the time. 4:17 a.m. I remember thinking that was weird because I'd gone to bed around 11 and felt like I'd been asleep longer than 5 hours. I don't usually wake up in the middle of the night unless something loud happens, like a car horn or thunder. But this was different. It was just quiet. Then I noticed the ceiling fan was moving. Not fast, just slowly turning, but in reverse. It's one of those old pull chain types with wooden blades, and I always keep it on low overnight to help with the heat. Normally it spins clockwise, blowing air down, but it was going counterclockwise. And again, the power was out. I just sat there watching it for a few seconds, trying to figure out how that was possible. It wasn't spinning on leftover momentum. It had a rhythm, a steady speed like it was being powered. But everything else was dead. No digital clocks, no streetlights outside, even the fridge wasn't making noise. I got up and checked the window. I live on the 3rd floor, and my building faces an alley. Usually, there's a light at the far end that throws some orange glow onto the pavement. But it was pitch black. Couldn't see a thing except a pale reflection of my own face in the glass. I was going to check my phone for a flashlight, but when I hit the button, it didn't turn on. Battery had been over 70% when I went to bed. I tried holding the power button, nothing. Dead. I went to the bathroom and lit a candle I keep under the sink. Just one of those little emergency tea lights. It was the only light I had. As soon as I lit it, I noticed the air in the apartment felt weird. Not stale exactly, but still. Like everything had stopped circulating. The candle flame didn't flicker. It just burned straight up. I stepped back into the bedroom and the fan had stopped. Just completely still, like it had never been moving. I looked up at it for a while, expecting it to twitch or wobble or something, but nothing. I checked my watch again. Still 4:17. I went out to the hallway. All the apartment doors were closed, no one moving around, no signs of other people even being awake. I stood there listening for footsteps or a toilet flush or anything, but the whole floor was dead silent. I tried the light switch in the hall just out of habit. Nothing. The whole building must have been out. I figured I'd go down to the lobby and see if anyone else was awake or if maintenance was around. The stairwell was pitch black, so I used a little tea light to light the way down. When I got to the lobby, the big windows were dark too. No cars passing, no light from the corner store across the street. It was like the whole block had been swallowed. I went up to the front doors and looked out. That's when I realized it wasn't just the building. There weren't any lights on anywhere. The street lights, the traffic signal at the corner, the apartment buildings across the way, nothing. Total blackout. But there wasn't a storm or anything. No wind, no rain, no emergency sirens. Just this quiet, dull silver light from the sky. I opened the door and stepped outside. It was cold. Not freezing, but colder than it should have been for that time of year. I walked a few steps into the street just to look around. That's when I noticed the sound. A low hum, really faint, like it was coming from underground or far away. Not mechanical, not like an engine or generator. Just a deep, steady vibration that I felt more than heard. Then I looked up. The sky wasn't right. I didn't notice it at first because it looked like a normal cloudy night. Pale gray with the moon barely visible behind it. But the clouds were moving in a circle, slowly but definitely rotating like the whole sky was being stirred. And the motion was centered right above my building. I kept staring, trying to make sense of it. The hum got a little louder. Not much, just enough that I could feel it in my chest. And then the streetlight across from me blinked on, just for a second. Bright white light, no flicker, and then off again. Same with the one next to it, like a pulse. Not a power surge, it was too controlled. One blink, off. Then another, a few seconds later. I backed toward the building, and when I got to the door, the lobby lights flicked on for half a second and went dark again. My watch still said 4:17. I went back up to my apartment. Everything looked the same. Fans still, phone still dead. The candle burned low on my bathroom counter. I sat on the edge of the bed and just waited. At some point, I don't remember feeling tired. I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, the sun was coming through the window. The power was back. Fan was spinning the right way again. Clock on the microwave said 8:42. My phone turned on fine. Full battery, no missed calls or alerts. My watch was still stuck at 4:17. I took it off and left it on the nightstand. It's still sitting there. It was just after 3 a.m. when I pulled into the lot behind the Petro off I-80 in Nebraska. I'd been driving since Des Moines and my back was screaming. My hours were almost up and I wasn't about to push it. I parked along the far edge of the lot, away from the other rigs, habit mostly. I like quiet when I sleep. I shut everything down, climbed into the sleeper, and cracked the window a little. There was a breeze, and it helped muffle the noise from the highway. I checked my phone, no messages, nothing missed, and set my alarm for 8. I usually wake up earlier, but I needed the rest. I remember drifting off to the sound of one of those big reefer units cycling on and off a few trucks over. Next thing I knew, I was awake again. No sound, no movement, just wide awake. It was still dark, but lighter than before, early dawn maybe. My clock said 5:24. What actually woke me up was my phone. Not ringing, already lit up, sitting face up on the shelf near my head, like it had just finished doing something. The screen said 1 new voicemail. No missed call, no notification from a number, just the voicemail icon. I sat up and stared at it for a second before picking it up. Checked the call log, nothing. No incoming calls since I'd left Iowa the night before. I tapped into voicemail and put it on speaker. It was just static. No voice, no tones, just that soft, low, crackling white noise. It ran for a few seconds before I heard this faint, weird tapping underneath it. Slow, steady, like something hitting metal, then pausing, then doing it again. I sat there listening, waiting for a voice or some clue, but it never changed. Just static and that tapping. I listened to the whole thing. 3 minutes, 2 seconds, then it ended. I played it again, same exact pattern. After the second time, I downloaded the message and tried to forward it to my buddy Cal, who used to mess with CD recordings and audio stuff. But the file didn't show up. I had the option to share, but when I tried, it said file not available. I went back to the voicemail list, and it was gone. Not deleted. Gone. Like it was never there. I sat there for a long time with the phone in my lap, trying to talk myself out of being weirded out. I checked my settings, rebooted the phone, went through the call log again. Still nothing. No number. No contact. I didn't go back to sleep. I climbed out of the cab around 6:30 and walked across the lot to the diner. Got coffee, eggs, the usual. Tried not to think about the voicemail. The waitress was chatty, and I let her talk at me for a while just to stay distracted. By the time I got back to my truck, the sun was up, and the lot was busier. I checked the truck, did my walk around, logged in my hours, and tried to settle back into normal. I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I turned the key and the radio came on, tuned to AM 530 for some reason. I always keep it on FM or satellite, so that was strange. 530 is usually dead air, but it wasn't. I heard a low hum, like a carrier signal with no voice, just a steady tone. I changed it and moved on. I drove west for most of the day, stopping in Ogallala to refuel. Somewhere between North Platte and Sydney, I started to get this feeling like something was off. The air felt heavy, like pressure in my ears, but not quite, just enough to make me uncomfortable. Around that time, I noticed the CB was acting up. Channel 19 kept breaking in and out like someone was trying to talk, but cutting off before finishing. At first, I figured it was interference, but it wasn't weather. Sky was clear. Then I picked up this really faint signal, someone whispering numbers, one at a time. Long pauses in between. I listened for a couple miles, but it didn't repeat or make any sense. I flipped through channels. Nothing. When I stopped in Cheyenne that night, I checked my phone again. Still no trace of the voicemail. I even called my own number from a landline to check it. Empty. No saved messages. I slept okay that night, in a better lit part of the lot with a few other rigs nearby. But I kept waking up feeling like someone was standing just outside the cab. Every time I looked, no one was there. The next morning, I got a text. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. It said, that was it. Just the word tap in brackets, spaced like they were trying to match the rhythm. I didn't respond. I blocked the number, deleted the thread, and threw the phone on the passenger seat. For the next few days, nothing else happened. No messages, no voicemails, no weird audio. I finished my run and parked the truck at the yard back home. Took a few days off, tried not to think about it. A week later, I was sitting in my kitchen watching a movie on my laptop when I heard that same tapping. Not on the phone, in the house, from somewhere near the laundry room. 3 slow taps, hollow and sharp, like someone knocking gently on metal with a coin. I got up and checked. Nothing there. Back door locked. Washer and dryer off. That night, I turned my phone off completely for the first time in years. I still use the same number. I've never gotten that voicemail again. But sometimes, when I'm parked at some quiet truck stop late at night, the CB will pick up static for a second, and I'll hear 3 faint taps underneath. Then silence. It happened somewhere between Tucumcari and Amarillo, mid-October, around 3 a.m. I was hauling for a regional outfit out of Albuquerque back then, doing mostly overnight freight. Long stretches of nothing, just me and the rig and whatever came over the radio. This run was Produce, headed eastbound on I-40, and I had a delivery window at a warehouse just outside Oklahoma City. I remember I had the windows cracked because the cab heater was acting up, blowing way too hot even on low. The air outside was cold and dry, just above freezing. Moon was out, but it was one of those thin ones that doesn't do much. Everything looked washed out. The asphalt, the signs, even the horizon. No color, no traffic either. That stretch can be dead quiet after midnight, and that night was no different. I was somewhere near the Texas line when the first light showed up. I didn't see it approach. It wasn't headlights coming up behind me. I would have seen those in the mirrors from miles off. It just sort of popped into view, right in the center mirror, like someone had turned on a bright LED flashlight and aimed it at the back of my trailer. It flared white for maybe a second, no more, then was gone. No fade in, no fade out, just there, then not. It startled me, but I figured maybe it was a reflection. Some weird angle of my own running lights bouncing off a road sign, or a flash of high beams from a car way behind me, even though I hadn't seen any in a while. 10 minutes later, I passed mile marker 227. That's when it got weird. About 20 or so minutes after that, I passed 227 again. I know that highway well. That sign should have been behind me. There's no turnarounds, no junctions that lead you back to the interstate without looping through a town. I hadn't taken any exits, hadn't slowed down. I even checked my GPS. It showed a steady eastward line, no deviations. I passed it again, and I knew it was the same one. It had a big dent in the post, like someone had backed into it with a trailer. I remembered seeing that earlier. Same exact bend. I slowed a little and turned down the radio. Something felt wrong. It wasn't just deja vu. It was like my brain knew I'd already done this exact thing, down to the pothole I hit just past the sign, the little shutter in the wheel. Then the light hit again, same place in the mirror. 1 bright flash, center of the rear view. 2 bright for taillights. 2 white for headlights. Just a flat, artificial glare like the sun coming off a windshield. No sound. No vehicles behind me. No change on the GPS. I kept driving. What else was I going to do? Another 20 minutes or so went by. I kept checking the mile markers, counting up 228, 229, 230. I let myself think maybe I'd imagined the repeat. Maybe I passed a temporary marker, one of those maintenance ones they stick in the ground during repairs. Then around 350, I passed 227 again. Same bend in the post, same pothole, same flash in the mirror not long after. I pulled over, hazards on, middle of nowhere, dead silence except for the ticking of the engine cooling. I got out and walked around the trailer. Tires were fine, latches secure, nothing dragging or flapping, no other vehicles in sight either direction. Just the road stretching flat in both directions and the distant silhouette of scrub brush and barbed wire fence. When I got back in the cab, the GPS still showed I was headed east. Same highway, no loops, no backtracking. Nothing to suggest I'd turned around. But I knew I had seen that same sign 3 times now. I kept driving, a little slower. The road didn't feel right after that. I started noticing things I couldn't explain. There was a patch of pavement that felt smoother than it should have, like it had just been poured. No road crew in sight. Then there were these 2 power poles off to the left, just barely visible in the dark, that looked like they were leaning inward toward each other, like they'd been warped or pulled. Another mile or two on, I passed a field that looked too perfect. I know that sounds dumb, but everything in it was symmetrical. The bushes, the fencing, even the way the grass looked under the moonlight. Like someone had copied and pasted it a few times. It didn't look natural. Then, the third flash. This time I felt it more than I saw it, like a heat behind my eyes. It showed up dead center in the rear view, flared out across the back window, and vanished. No follow-up. I braked hard and pulled onto the shoulder again. I sat there, hands on the wheel, breathing through my nose. Everything was quiet. No wind. No engine sounds except the low idle. Then my radio cut out. Not the station, the whole thing. The dash lights on the stereo went dark. It didn't even try to search for a signal, just dead. Then the dash clock froze, said 4:04 and didn't budge. I tapped it, thinking maybe I'd jostled something, but it stayed frozen. Engine still running fine, GPS still on, just the radio and clock both gone at once. I didn't move for maybe 10 minutes, just stared at the empty highway, waiting to see headlights, taillights, a police cruiser, anything. Nothing came. Eventually I eased back onto the road. The GPS map hadn't updated at all during the stop. It still showed me in motion, heading east, as if I hadn't pulled over at all. I thought maybe it glitched, but when I tapped it, the location marker jumped back to my current position, like it had just realized I'd stopped and started again. Another mile passed, then 2, then 5. No more flashes. No more repeat markers. Everything looked normal again. Old fence lines, faded signs, a dead armadillo in the left lane, stuff that actually made sense. I didn't breathe easy until I passed mile marker 235. New number. No dent. No deja vu. The radio came back on at 4:37. No static or warm-up. It just snapped back in with a song mid-play. Clock blinked once, then corrected itself. No explanation. I made the delivery just after 7. Didn't say anything to the dock guys. Didn't mention it to dispatch. I wasn't even sure how to start that conversation. Next time I ran that route, a week later, I checked for that mile marker. 227 was right where I remembered it. Same dent in the post. I passed it once, like normal, and kept going. No lights, no flashes, no weird fields or warped poles. But now, every time I'm on that stretch, I watch the mirror like a hawk. I keep the GPS zoomed in. I mark every mile in my head, because I know what I saw, I know what I didn't imagine, and I still don't understand how I passed the same sign 3 times without ever turning around. I was driving back from a friend's place out in the country, about an hour and a half from where I live. It was almost midnight when I left, later than I meant to, and I took back roads most of the way. Flat, open farmland, not much traffic. 1-lane roads, no streetlights, the kind of route where you don't pass another car for 20 minutes at a time. It was quiet. I had the radio off, windows cracked a little, just cruising. I wasn't tired, but I remember feeling kind of spaced out. You get that way sometimes on those long, empty drives, like you're the only person awake in the whole world. I noticed the blinking light maybe 15 minutes in. It was off to the right, low in the sky. White, steady blink. Not fast, not random. About every 2 seconds. I figured it was a plane at first, or maybe a tower light way off in the distance. It didn't really bother me, just something to look at. But it started getting weird when I made a left turn at a 4-way intersection. I wasn't thinking about the light, just following my GPS, but after I turned, it was still in the exact same spot. Off to the right, same distance, same blink pattern. Like it had turned with me. I slowed down and looked at it harder. It wasn't flashing red or green like a plane, just white, and always at the same rhythm. I thought maybe it was a drone, but who flies a drone way out there at night? After a few more turns, I started paying attention. Every time I changed direction, the light stayed at the same angle, always off to the right, never closer, never farther, like it was stuck to my car in the sky somehow. I rolled the window down more and stuck my head out while driving. No sound. If it was a drone, it was flying silent. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder and turned the engine off just to see. The blinking kept going, same pace. It didn't move. It didn't hover or wobble or drift. Just blinked, still off to my right, above the cornfields. I sat there for maybe a minute, waiting for it to do something, move, fly off, anything. It didn't. So I started driving again. A few miles later, I passed a farmhouse with the porch light on. I had this brief thought about pulling in and asking if they'd seen it too, but I didn't. I don't even know what I would have said. Hey, is there a weird light following me? I tried not to look at it after that. I focused on the road, tried to convince myself it was just some radio tower I kept seeing from different angles. But a couple more turns, and it still hadn't changed position. Then, maybe 20 minutes from home, I drove through a little dip in the road, a kind of shallow valley where trees lined both sides. I lost sight of the light for a bit. The road curved slightly left, then back right. When I came up out of the dip, the light was gone. I actually felt relieved for a second. Like, okay, whatever it was, maybe I'd just gotten out of range or passed behind a hill. Then I saw it again, in my rearview mirror. Same blinking, same height, same rhythm. Except now it was behind me, not coming toward me, just there, like it had repositioned without me seeing it move. That was when I got really uncomfortable. I didn't feel like I was in danger exactly, but it was this deep, tense kind of feeling, like something wasn't right and I shouldn't be out there. I sped up. Not crazy fast, but faster than I'd been going. I kept checking the mirror. The light stayed behind me, never getting closer or farther, always blinking, always the same spot. About 10 minutes out from town, I passed another car going the opposite way. First one I'd seen all night. I had this sudden idea. Maybe the light would follow them instead. Like maybe it wasn't about me, maybe it just picked random cars. But after they passed, I checked the mirror again. Still there, still blinking. I turned onto the highway that runs into town. It's a little more built up. A few gas stations, some traffic lights. The blinking light faded into the background once I got closer to the edge of town. Too many other lights. I kept looking for it, but I couldn't spot it anymore. I pulled into a gas station and parked under the awning. Just sat there for a bit, hands on the wheel, watching the sky. Nothing, just stars. A couple planes way up high, regular stuff. I went inside to grab a water, didn't say anything to the cashier. When I came back out, I looked around one more time. The light wasn't there. I drove home. No more blinking, no strange lights, just normal night. The next day I checked online for any kind of tower map, just to see if there were any installations out there that might match what I saw. Nothing in the right spot. And anyway, it had moved with me. Towers don't do that. I still don't know what it was. Maybe there's a simple answer and I just didn't think of it. But I've done that drive a dozen times since, and I've never seen anything like that again. I was hunting alone in eastern Tennessee when this happened, out near a stretch of private woodland a friend let me use during deer season. The property backed against miles of dense trees and rolling hills with almost no houses nearby. I'd hunted there plenty of times before and knew the trails well enough to walk them in the dark without a flashlight. That morning, I got to the blind around 4:45 a.m. Still completely dark outside. Cold enough that frost covered dead leaves and the wooden steps up to the blind felt slick under my boots. The sky overhead looked cloudy but not stormy, just thick gray-black overcast with no stars visible. The blind itself sat about 12 feet off the ground, overlooking a clearing, maybe 70 yards wide. Trees surrounded it on three sides. Nothing unusual about the setup. I climbed inside, shut the little wooden door quietly behind me, and settled in to wait for first light. Normally mornings out there were loud even before sunrise. Owls, insects, birds waking up gradually once the sky started changing. That morning felt different immediately. Too quiet. At first I figured the cold snap scared everything off. I remember checking my phone before putting it away. 4:58 a.m. No signal out there as usual. I sat there maybe 15 minutes listening to wind push through the trees outside. Then the wind stopped. Not slowly, just gone. The silence afterward felt strange enough that I noticed it right away. No leaves moving anymore, no branches creaking, nothing. I shifted slightly in the blind and even my jacket sounded too loud. That's when I noticed the light. It hovered above the tree line across the clearing. Bright white. Not glaring or flashing, just steady. At first I assumed it was a tower light or maybe a distant helicopter facing toward me, but something about the position looked wrong. The light sat too low above the trees and didn't move at all. I stared at it for maybe a minute, waiting for blinking lights or aircraft noise. Nothing came. The light remained perfectly still. I remember actually getting annoyed with it because once I noticed it, I couldn't stop looking back. I forced myself to scan the clearing for deer movement instead. A few minutes later, I glanced toward the tree line again. The light looked closer, not dramatically closer, but larger somehow. I frowned and leaned nearer to the blind window, trying to judge distance. Still silent, still hovering above the trees. The weird part was I couldn't figure out what I was actually looking at. Sometimes it resembled one bright light. Other times it looked softer around the edges, almost blurred. I checked my phone again, 5:21. That surprised me because it felt like maybe 5 minutes had passed. I put the phone away and kept watching the clearing. No animals moved anywhere, not even squirrels. The woods remained dead silent. That started bothering me more than the light itself. I've spent enough mornings outside to know forests are never truly silent before dawn. Even during bad weather, you hear something. Now there was absolutely nothing. Then came a sound underneath the blind. A single slow crunch in the leaves. I froze immediately. Another crunch followed a few seconds later, heavy enough to sound like a person walking. I leaned carefully toward the side window and looked down. Darkness beneath the blind. No flashlight beam, no visible movement. The steps leading up remained empty. I listened hard. Nothing else came. After maybe 30 seconds, I looked back toward the light. Closer again. That's when my stomach tightened for the first time, because the trees beneath it looked clearer now. Not because daylight arrived, because the light itself seemed nearer to the clearing. I know that makes no sense if it never moved, but that's exactly how it felt. Like every time I stopped looking directly at it, the distance shortened slightly. I rubbed my eyes thinking maybe fog or darkness distorted perspective. Then I noticed something else. The light wasn't reflecting normally on the wet leaves below. Parts of the clearing should have been illuminated by then if it was really that bright. Instead, the ground stayed oddly dark. Only the edges of some branches caught faint, pale highlights. I became aware then of a smell in the air. Wet metal, almost electrical. The same smell you get near overheated wires. I checked the heater pack in my backpack, thinking maybe batteries leaked or something. Nothing wrong there. Outside the blind, the smell remained. The light stayed fixed above the tree line. I tried ignoring it again. Maybe another 20 minutes passed, or at least I thought it did. I started feeling strangely tired. Not sleepy exactly, more mentally slow. My thoughts kept drifting. Then another crunch sounded beneath the blind. Closer this time. I leaned toward the floor, instinctively listening. The wooden platform vibrated slightly under my boots. Not enough to shake visibly. Just a faint pressure like someone resting a hand against the support post below. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. The woods remained silent. I slowly raised my rifle toward the floor hatch, even though I knew how ridiculous that was. Then I noticed something that made my chest go cold. No condensation came from my breath anymore. The air inside the blind felt warmer, suddenly. Not comfortable warm. Wrong warm. Like stepping indoors unexpectedly. I checked outside again. The light above the trees appeared much larger now. Still perfectly still. And definitely lower. I could make out faint fog around it, even though the rest of the woods looked clear. I finally decided it had to be somebody with equipment out there. Maybe another hunter breaking rules with spotlights. But if somebody stood that close to the clearing, I should have heard movement. Nothing moved. Nothing called. Nothing flew overhead. Then the blind wall behind me creaked softly. Not from wind. Pressure, like somebody leaning against the outside boards. I spun around immediately. The rear window showed only dark trees. Another soft creak came from the same spot. I held perfectly still listening. Then 3 slow knocks sounded against the outside wall. Knock, 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 knock. Not loud, careful, measured. I remember every muscle in my body locking instantly. The light outside remained motionless beyond the clearing, but somehow closer again. Large enough now that it no longer looked distant above the trees. It seemed level with them. I checked my phone again with shaking hands. 6:43 a.m. That made no sense at all. Daylight should have started already, but outside remained dim, gray darkness. I opened the weather app automatically before realizing there was still no signal. The battery showed 12%. It had been nearly full earlier. Then the screen flickered once and shut off completely. The knocking outside the blind came again, this time from beneath me, directly under the floor. 3 slow knocks. The wooden boards vibrated lightly with each one. I stood up so fast my shoulder hit the ceiling. The blind suddenly felt too small. The smell of wet metal had grown much stronger. Then came another sound from outside. Breathing. Slow. Not animal snorting. Human breathing. Right beside the blind wall, I grabbed the side window latch and almost opened it before stopping myself. Every instinct I had screamed not to look outside that closely. Instead, I forced myself toward the front opening again. The clearing looked empty. The light hovered above the trees, and for the first time I realized the trees directly beneath it looked darker than everything else around them. Not shadowed. Absent somehow. Then the light brightened slightly. At the exact same moment, every hair on my arm stood up. A low humming noise filled the air, very faint. I felt it more in my teeth than my ears. The blind floor vibrated softly beneath me. Outside, the clearing grass bent slightly inward toward the trees, as if wind pushed from one direction. But there was still no actual wind. The humming deepened. And suddenly, I became certain something stood directly underneath the blind, looking upward. I don't know why I felt that so strongly. I just knew. I backed against the rear wall, breathing hard. The knocking stopped. The humming continued another few seconds. Then everything went silent again. Complete silence. Even my own breathing sounded muffled somehow. The light above the tree line dimmed slightly, and daylight appeared all at once, not gradually. One moment, gray darkness filled the clearing. The next, pale morning light spread across the woods. Birds should have exploded into noise immediately. They didn't. The forest stayed dead silent. The bright, hovering light was gone, completely vanished. No movement away, no fading upward, just gone. I sat there stunned, trying to understand what happened. The clearing looked ordinary again. Cold morning fog between trees, frost on grass. Nothing unusual. Then I realized I hadn't heard a single bird all morning. Not one. That hit me harder than the light disappearing. Because I suddenly understood how unnatural the silence had been the entire time. I climbed down from the blind fast enough that I nearly slipped on the ladder. The ground underneath looked undisturbed at first. Then I noticed the leaves directly beneath the blind supports, flattened in a rough circle around the base. Not footprints exactly. More like something heavy had stood there long enough to press moisture from the leaves into the dirt. The smell of wet metal lingered faintly in the air. I walked back toward my truck quickly without stopping. The woods remained strangely quiet for another several minutes. Then gradually normal sounds returned. First distant crows, then smaller birds, then wind again through branches. By the time I reached the truck, everything sounded ordinary. I checked the dashboard clock after starting the engine. 8:12 a.m. I stared at it for a long time because, according to my phone earlier, it should have been around 7 at most. I drove out without going back for another hunt. About halfway down the dirt access road, I looked in the rearview mirror toward the tree line one last time. For a split second, I thought I saw the same pale light standing motionless between the trees. Not above them anymore. At ground level, watching from deep in the woods before the road curved and blocked the view. I worked track maintenance for a freight line outside Amarillo for about 5 years, mostly overnight inspection work, replacing signal hardware, checking switches, clearing debris after storms. The route I covered ran through long stretches of empty land with isolated crossings every few miles. This happened in late April during one of those dry, windy nights where dust hangs in the air even after sunset. The sky stayed cloudy but bright enough that you could still see the outline of the land around you. I was alone that shift. Around 1:15 in the morning, I was parked near an old crossing road called Mercer Road, checking a signal cabinet that had been acting up earlier that week. It wasn't a busy crossing, just a 2-lane farm road cutting through flat land and barbed wire fences. The nearest scheduled train wasn't due until after 4. I remember that specifically because dispatch had warned us the line would stay quiet for several hours while another crew handled maintenance farther south. I'd just finished tightening connections inside the signal cabinet when the crossing bells activated behind me. Suddenly. Loud as hell in the middle of the night. The red lights started flashing and the crossing arms lowered across the road. I jumped because it happened without warning. My first thought was track circuit malfunction. It happened occasionally with bad weather or grounding issues, but something immediately felt off. No vibration in the rails. Usually even distant trains carried a faint hum through the tracks long before headlights appeared. Now there was nothing, just bells, flashing red lights, and wind pushing dust across the road. I walked over to the tracks and looked both directions. Empty, completely dark. The crossing continued running. I radioed dispatch, asking if any unscheduled movement entered the section. Static answered first. Then dispatch came back confused. No traffic in your zone. I remember glancing at the rails while talking. One of them reflected light strangely, not from the crossing signals. A pale white reflection stretched along the top of the steel farther down the line northbound. I stepped closer, squinting into the dark. That's when I saw the light itself. It hovered maybe 3 or 4 feet above the rails about half a mile away. Soft white. Not bright enough to illuminate the land around it much. Just this pale circular glow suspended above the tracks. At first, I honestly thought somebody had a maintenance lantern out there. Then I realized it wasn't moving like a person carrying a light. It stayed perfectly level over the rails and completely silent. The crossing bells kept ringing behind me. I told dispatch I thought another maintenance crew might be on the line. They said nobody else was authorized in that section. The radio crackled badly during the conversation. So much static I had trouble hearing. While talking, I kept watching the light. It drifted slowly closer, not fast enough to seem threatening, but smooth, like it floated instead of traveled. Still no train sounds. No engine, no headlights behind it. The weirdest part was how the rails behaved underneath it. The steel reflected the glow long before the object itself reached that section of track, almost like the reflection moved ahead of it. The crossing signals continued flashing wildly, then every insect sound around the crossing stopped. I hadn't even noticed crickets before until they disappeared. The silence felt immediate and unnatural. Even the wind seemed quieter somehow. Dispatch asked if I was still there. I answered yes. Then they asked why my voice sounded distant. That made my stomach tighten. I was holding the radio right against my mouth. I looked back toward my truck parked beside the signal cabinet. Its headlights had dimmed noticeably. Not off, just weak looking. The pale light above the tracks kept approaching. I could see now it wasn't exactly round. Its edges shifted slightly, almost blurry against the dark. I started walking backward away from the rails without meaning to. The crossing arm stayed lowered. Red lights flashed across the dust blowing through the road. Then I noticed another strange thing. The warning bell sound had slowed down. Not fully slower maybe, but deeper. Distorted somehow, like hearing it underwater. The pale light stopped moving. It hovered maybe 200 yards down the tracks now. I stared at it trying to make sense of the size. Sometimes it looked small as a lantern, then suddenly larger than a car headlight. The distance felt wrong. I don't know how else to explain it. The radio crackled again. This time I heard voices inside the static, not dispatch. Several overlapping voices talking too fast to understand. Then silence. I checked the radio channel display, thinking maybe interference crossed frequencies. The screen was blank, not dead, blank. No numbers, no backlight. The pale light drifted sideways slightly above the tracks. The crossing signals immediately sped back up to normal rhythm, then slowed again when the lights stopped. That was the moment I realized the signals were reacting to it somehow, not malfunctioning randomly, reacting. My chest started pounding hard enough I could feel it in my throat. I remember looking toward the road, hoping headlights from another vehicle would appear. Nothing, just empty farmland and flashing red crossing lights. Then I heard something metallic far down the tracks. Not a train, more like steel flexing under pressure. The rails beside me vibrated once very softly. The pale light brightened slightly, and for a second I saw something beneath it. Not clearly, just a darker shape suspended inside the glow. Long maybe. Vertical. I actually whispered, "What the hell?" out loud without realizing it. Then the crossing lights shut off instantly. Complete silence. The arms remained lowered though. That bothered me immediately because the system wasn't supposed to do that. No bells. No flashing. Just the wooden barriers stretched across the road while the pale light hovered down the tracks. The silence became so heavy I could hear my own breathing through my nose. Then came a low humming sound. Very faint. I felt it more through the ground than heard it. The rails beside me started vibrating continuously, not violently, just enough that small pebbles along the ties rattled softly. The pale light moved again, closer now, maybe 100 yards away, and suddenly the crossing arms rose back upward. The second they lifted, the humming stopped. Everything stopped. Even the vibration in the rails disappeared. But the light remained, hovering directly over the track's center line. I became aware then that the air smelled strange, hot metal and rain together. The same smell you get before transformers blow during storms. I started backing toward my truck slowly. The light drifted another few yards closer, then stopped again. I could finally tell it wasn't attached to anything solid I recognized. No visible structure, no aircraft shape, just pale light wrapped around something darker at the center. My truck radio suddenly turned on by itself. Loud static burst from the cab speakers, hard enough to make me flinch. Headlights dimmed again, then brightened, then dimmed once more. I climbed into the truck immediately and locked the doors, which felt stupid because nothing about the situation made sense anyway. The pale light stayed outside above the tracks. I grabbed the company flashlight and aimed it through the windshield toward the object. The beam barely reached it, but for a second the flashlight flickered strangely and reflected off something smooth near the center of the glow. Not metal exactly, more like wet glass. Then the flashlight died completely. Full battery gone. At the same moment, the pale light began drifting south along the rails. Not toward me anymore, away. The crossing signals activated again instantly behind it. Bells started ringing, lights flashing, like the system tracked the thing moving down the line. I watched it glide slowly across the dark farmland above the rails, while each crossing farther south began activating one after another in sequence. I could actually see distant red flashes miles away. The signals triggered ahead of it. The light never changed speed. Still silent, still low above the tracks. Then the truck engine shut off. No sputtering, just dead. The dashboard lights remained on, though. I sat frozen, gripping the wheel while the pale glow drifted farther away down the line. Eventually it became small enough to mistake for a distant signal light. Then smaller, then gone. The crossing bells at Mercer Road stopped immediately afterward. Everything returned to normal all at once. Wind noise, crickets, even the smell faded. I sat there another 10 minutes before trying the truck again. Started perfectly. Radio working, headlights normal. I called dispatch back. They sounded irritated because apparently they'd been trying to reach me for nearly 40 minutes. I looked at the dashboard clock. 2:03 a.m. That made no sense. The whole incident felt maybe 10 minutes long, 15 at absolute most. Dispatch asked if I'd fixed the signal malfunction. I almost told them everything. Instead, I just said the crossing activated unexpectedly, but seemed normal now. They asked if a train passed. I said no. Then dispatch got quiet for a second before telling me something strange. 3 crossings south of Mercer Road had activated sequentially around the same time with no trains detected in the system. Each one shut off after about 30 seconds, like something moved through the line without touching the tracks. I drove home after sunrise. Before leaving, I checked the rails where the light had hovered closest. The steel looked discolored there, not burned, just oddly pale compared to the surrounding track. And along one section of ballast rock beside the rails, every small stone had been turned in the same direction, like something had pushed air across them in one smooth sweep. I reached the quarry a little before sunrise, when the whole place still looked blue. It was one of those January mornings where the cold had weight to it. My truck thermometer said 9 degrees, but it felt worse once I stepped out and the wind came across the open pit. The quarry had been closed for years, fenced off on 3 sides and bordered by state land on the 4th. I wasn't supposed to be there exactly, but everyone in town knew photographers went out there for owls and foxes because nobody bothered you if you stayed near the old access road. I'd driven up from Harrisburg the night before and slept at a motel off Route 22. I was working on a winter wildlife series. Nothing fancy, just trying to get enough shots to submit to a local magazine. My plan was to catch coyotes moving along the ridge before the sun came up. Instead, I saw the lights. They were hanging over the frozen water at the bottom of the quarry. At first, I thought they were reflections from the road, maybe headlights catching ice through the trees. But there was no road on that side, no houses, no equipment, just the pit, the ice, and the black line of trees above it. There were 3 lights, pale and steady, arranged in a rough triangle. They weren't bright enough to light the whole quarry, but they made small, soft circles on the ice below them. They didn't sway like lanterns or bob like drones. They just hovered there, maybe 20 feet above the surface. I stood beside my truck with my camera bag hanging from one shoulder, not moving. The worst part was how quiet it was. Usually at dawn you heard something. Crows, branches cracking, wind scraping across the snow. That morning the whole place felt muted, like the cold had sealed it shut. I took the camera out slowly because I had this stupid feeling that if I moved too fast the lights would notice. I had my old Nikon with a telephoto lens already attached. I raised it, focused as best I could through the dimness, and started shooting. The first few shots were probably blurry. My hands weren't steady. I adjusted the ISO, braced my elbow against the truck, and took more. The lights stayed exactly where they were. Then the middle light dipped. Not far. Maybe a foot. Just enough that the triangle changed shape. The other 2 followed a second later, dropping the same distance like they were attached to something I couldn't see. I lowered the camera. Down in the quarry, the ice made a sound. A low pop, then another, like stress cracks spreading. I'd heard lake ice before, but this was different. Shorter, more deliberate. One of the lights flickered, then all 3 went out. No fade, no movement away, just gone. The sound came back after that. Wind in the trees, a bird somewhere behind me, my own breathing too loud in my ears. I checked the back of the camera. The images were there. Small bright points over the ice with the quarry wall behind them. Not good photos, but enough to prove I hadn't imagined it. I stayed another 20 minutes, pretending I was there for wildlife. I didn't see a single animal. By 7, I packed up and left. Back at the motel, I copied the files onto my laptop. The room smelled like old carpet and overheated baseboard air. I sat on the bed in my coat because I still couldn't warm up. The photos looked stranger on the bigger screen. There were the lights, sure, but in 2 of the shots there was a faint darker shape between them. Not solid, more like a patch of sky that didn't match the rest. I zoomed in until the image broke into pixels and still couldn't tell what I was looking at. I didn't post anything. I didn't send them around. I only texted my sister Jenna and said, "Saw something weird at the quarry this morning. Might be nothing." She replied with a laughing emoji and asked if I got pictures. I didn't answer. The rest of the day felt off. I tried going back out to shoot deer near a frozen creek, but I couldn't focus. My camera kept giving me card errors for a second, then working fine. My truck radio cut to static twice on roads where it never had before. At one point, around 3 in the afternoon, I noticed a black sedan behind me on a 2-lane road. It stayed there for 6 miles, never passing, never falling back. When I turned into a gas station, it kept going. I told myself I was being paranoid. That night, someone knocked on my motel room door at 9:36. I know the exact time because I was looking at my laptop when it happened. I had the photos open again. 3 knocks. Even. Calm. I closed the laptop halfway and looked through the peephole. 2 men stood outside. They didn't look like cops. They didn't look like motel staff either. Both wore dark coats, dark pants, plain dress shoes. One was tall and thin with narrow shoulders and hair combed tight against his head. The other was shorter, heavier, with a round face and a soft, polite expression. I opened the door with the chain on. "Can I help you?" The taller one smiled. "Mr. Rourke?" I didn't answer right away. "We're here to verify atmospheric anomalies observed this morning," he said. That was such a strange sentence that I almost laughed. "Who are you with?" I asked. "Records," the shorter man said. "Records of what?" He smiled a little wider. "Atmospheric anomalies." The taller man glanced past me into the room. His eyes went straight to the camera bag on the chair. Not the laptop. Not me. The bag. I shifted to block his view. "I don't know what you're talking about." "That's fine," the taller one said. "We can keep this simple. They never asked to come in. That somehow made it worse. They just stood in the cold hallway, perfectly still, with the buzzing motel light above them making their faces look flat." The shorter one said, "You were at the quarry before sunrise." I said nothing. "You photographed 3 separate light sources above frozen water," he continued. Approximately 6:16 a.m. My throat tightened. I hadn't told Jenna the time. I hadn't told anyone there were 3 lights. Did you report it? The tall one asked. No. Did you transmit the images? No. Did you make duplicate storage? I hesitated. The shorter man noticed. His eyes moved to the laptop on the bed. The taller one took out a small notebook. Laptop copy, he said, writing it down. I hated how casual he sounded, like he was logging a maintenance issue. I'm not giving you my camera, I said. No one asked for your camera, the shorter man said. But he kept staring at the bag. The tall one asked me to describe what I saw. I told him the basics because lying felt pointless. 3 lights, over the ice, no sound, then cracking noises, then gone. When I mentioned the ice, both men looked up the ceiling at the same time, not toward a sound, just up. The shorter one nodded once, like he'd heard an answer. Did you see anyone else present? The taller man asked. No. Any figure near you? No. He paused with the pen over the paper. You're certain? Yes. The shorter man looked back at the camera bag. You did not notice someone beside you? I stared at him. There was no one beside me. He gave a small nod, but he didn't look convinced. The tall man asked if I'd felt pressure in my ears, if I'd smelled anything metallic, if I'd experienced confusion about how long I'd been there. I told him no to all 3, though the last one made me think. I'd gotten to the quarry before sunrise. I left at 7. That felt right. But when I tried to remember packing the camera away, the sequence wasn't clean. I remembered the bag open on the passenger seat. I remembered starting the truck. I didn't remember zipping the bag. The shorter man said, you should avoid revisiting the location for a while. How long is a while? That depends, he said. On what? The taller man closed the notebook. On whether it remains where it was. Neither of them threatened me. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't demand anything. They were almost polite the whole time, which somehow made me feel more trapped. Before they left, the shorter one said, your equipment may have recorded more than you intended. I said, is that why you're here? He smiled. No, he said. That's why we're late. They walked down the motel hallway together. I waited for footsteps on the stairs, a car door, an engine. Nothing. I shut the door and slid the deadbolt. Then I sat on the bed and stared at the camera bag. The room felt too warm now. I opened the laptop. The photos were still there. At first they looked the same. Lights over ice, dark quarry wall, gray dawn. Then I reached the last image. It was one I didn't remember taking. The frame was wider than the others, like the camera had been lower or farther back. My truck was visible on the left. The quarry was in the background. The 3 lights hovered over the ice, and I was in the photo. I stood beside the truck, camera raised to my face. Someone stood next to me. Not close enough to touch. Just beside me, turned slightly toward the quarry. Tall, dark coat, hands at his sides. The figure was clear enough to see he wasn't wearing a hat, clear enough to see his head was angled toward the lights. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. No face, just a pale blur where one should have been. I checked the file data. Same morning, same location. Taken at 6:19 a.m. I hadn't used a timer. I hadn't set up a tripod. Nobody else had been there. I pulled the memory card from the camera and put it back in, like that would change something. The camera body was warm in my hands, even though it had been sitting untouched for hours. In the morning, I packed before sunrise and drove home without stopping at the quarry. A week later, I opened the photo again. The figure was still there, but closer to me than before. I closed the laptop and didn't look again. I noticed him the first time because he was sitting in the wrong place. I worked the front desk at a small outpatient clinic in Mesa, Arizona. Nothing dramatic. Beige walls, bad art, the smell of disinfectant, and burnt coffee. Patients checked in, sat down, stared at their phones, got called back. The lobby had a very obvious flow to it. If you were waiting, you sat facing the TV or the windows. The chairs by the elevator were technically for overflow, but no one ever used them unless the place was packed. It was around 8:15 in the morning, already hot outside, that dry desert heat that felt wrong before noon. I was logging someone into the system when I looked up and saw a man sitting in one of the elevator chairs. Just one chair pulled slightly away from the others, angled so he could see straight down the hall. He wasn't looking at the TV. He wasn't on his phone. He was watching the elevator doors. I remember thinking maybe he was early for an appointment upstairs. That happened sometimes, but usually people hovered near the call button or stood. They didn't sit like they were settling in for a long wait. He looked normal enough at a glance, mid-30s maybe. Dark hair cut short, clean-shaven, plain gray button-up shirt, dark pants, no jacket, no bag. His hands were folded loosely in his lap. After a few minutes, it started to bother me that he hadn't checked in. We had a sign-in tablet right on the counter. Big and obvious. People missed it sometimes, but not for that long. I finished with the patient in front of me and called out, "Sir, if you're here for an appointment, you'll need to sign in." He didn't react. Not even a flicker. Didn't turn his head. Didn't shift. Nothing. Just kept staring at the elevator doors like he was waiting for them to open on their own. I thought maybe he had headphones in, but I couldn't see any. I tried again, a little louder. Still nothing. That's when I really looked at him. His eyes were open, but not focused on anything specific. They tracked the elevator panel when the light above it flicked on for another floor, then went back to the scene between the doors. A patient came out of the elevator then, and the doors opened right in front of him. He leaned back slightly to give them space, but didn't look at the person. The doors closed again, and he leaned forward to his original position. I didn't push it. I told myself he was waiting for someone. Or maybe he was confused. We got a lot of confused people. Around 9:30, he stood up and walked out. I didn't see him sign out. I didn't hear the door. 1 second he was there, the next time I glanced over, the chair was empty. The second day, he was there when I arrived. Same chair, same posture, same clothes. It was 7:55 a.m. The lobby had just opened. Third grass, no patients yet, just me, the cleaning crew finishing up, and him. I stopped just inside the door and stood there longer than I should have, watching him. He was already staring at the elevator. I asked the cleaner, Rosa, if she'd seen him come in. She frowned and said, "Who?" I pointed. She looked where I was pointing and then back at me. "Girl," she said quietly, "there's no one there." I looked again. He was still there, still watching. I laughed it off, embarrassed, and said, "Never mind." Rosa left a few minutes later, shaking her head like I was messing with her. I watched him for most of the morning. He never moved except to adjust slightly when the elevator opened. Never checked his phone. Never spoke. Never signed in. At one point, a kid started crying in the lobby, loud and sudden. Everyone jumped. He didn't. I finally called security around 10. Just asked them to send someone to check on a guy who might be lost or having a medical issue. While I was on the phone, I glanced over again. The chair was empty. Security came anyway. Walked the lobby, checked the bathrooms, shrugged, asked for a description. When I described him, the guard frowned and said no one matching that had come through. The third day, I told myself I wouldn't look. I failed about 30 seconds after sitting down. He was back. Same spot, same clothes, same stillness. This time, the air conditioning felt too loud. Every sound felt like it echoed. I couldn't stop thinking about Rosa not seeing him, or how security hadn't seen him leave. I didn't call out to him. I didn't call security. I just watched. Around noon, one of the nurses, Kyle, came up to the desk and followed my gaze. "You keep staring at that chair," he said. "Do you see him?" I asked. "See who?" My stomach dropped. I didn't answer. I just shook my head. He left again sometime in the afternoon. I didn't notice him go. I just realized at some point that the chair was empty. That night, I asked our office manager if we could pull the lobby cameras. I said a patient had complained about someone making them uncomfortable. She agreed. We sat in her office after closing, the desert sky outside already dark and cooling fast. We scrubbed through 3 days of footage. The lobby was empty every morning until patients arrived. The chairs by the elevator were always empty. No man, no movement, no sign of anyone sitting there. On the third day's footage, I watched myself stare at an empty chair for hours. I didn't come in the next day. I called out sick and stayed home, curtains drawn, trying not to picture that chair. When I went back the day after that, the chairs by the elevator were gone. Facilities said they'd been removed months ago. No one remembered them being there at all. The elevator still opened and closed. I stopped watching it. I noticed the temperature drop before I saw anything. My name's Aaron. I was driving alone through a stretch of desert highway in southern Nevada, heading back from a job out near Tonopah. It's the kind of road where you can go 20, 30 minutes without seeing another car. Just straight asphalt, sand on both sides, and nothing else. It was late. Around 1 a.m., still warm even at night. My dash was reading 27 degrees Celsius when I last looked. I had the windows cracked slightly, radio on low, just trying to stay alert. There wasn't much to look at except the road and the occasional reflective marker catching the headlights. I checked the temperature again without really thinking. 27, normal. I drove maybe another mile, then it dropped, fast. 27, 23, 19, 15. I remember watching the numbers change in real time like something was glitching. It settled at 12 degrees Celsius. I blinked, looked up at the road, then back down. Still 12. I rolled the window down a bit more. The air felt cooler, not freezing, but definitely colder than it had been seconds before. Too sudden to make sense. I adjusted the vents, thinking maybe the sensor was off, but the air coming in matched the reading. Cooler, dry, almost still. I slowed down slightly. The road ahead looked the same, flat, empty. Then I saw the lights. At first I thought they were reflections, maybe distant headlights from another vehicle cresting a hill. But they didn't move like headlights, they were low, close to the ground, and there were too many of them. A cluster, soft white, maybe 5 or 6 points grouped together just above the road surface. They hovered. That's the only way I can describe it. Not touching the ground. Not casting any light onto it either, just sitting there a few inches or maybe a foot above the asphalt. I took my foot off the accelerator. The car slowed to about 40. The lights didn't react. Didn't move toward me, didn't fade. They just stayed there, perfectly still. I remember thinking maybe it was some kind of reflection from my own headlights, but they were too far ahead, and the angles didn't make sense. I kept rolling forward, slow, careful. The temperature reading stayed at 12. It didn't budge. The closer I got, the clearer the lights became. They weren't bright, more like a dull glow. Each one slightly different in intensity, not blinking, not flickering, just steady. I looked around, trying to see if there was anything else, any source. A vehicle parked off the road, a structure, nothing, just sand and darkness. I was maybe 50 yards away when something changed. One of the lights shifted slightly. Not much, just a small movement upward. Then another followed, then all of them, in sync. They lifted together, slow at first like they were rising through thick air. I pressed the brake lightly. The car rolled to a near stop. I didn't want to get closer, didn't feel right. The lights reached maybe 10 or 15 feet above the road. Then they paused, held there for a second, completely silent. No sound from them, no change in the air. Just that cluster suspended in front of me. Then they moved, not forward, not backward, up, straight up, and fast. They shot upward all at once like something had pulled them. No trail, no fade, just gone. Vanished into the dark sky. I sat there for a second, staring at where they'd been. The road ahead was empty again. Nothing left. No afterimage, no glow. Just darkness and the faint reflection of my headlights. I checked the temperature again. Still 12. I waited a few seconds. Then it started climbing. Slowly this time. 13, 15, 18, back up to 27 over the next minute or so. The air warmed with it. Like whatever had caused the drop was gone. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing behind me. No lights. No movement. Just the empty stretch of road. I stayed stopped longer than I probably should have. Engine idling. Hands still on the wheel. Trying to figure out what I'd just seen. Nothing came to mind. Nothing that made sense. Eventually I started driving again. Slow at first. Then back up to speed. The rest of the drive was normal. No more lights. No more temperature changes. Just the road and the silence. But the part that stuck with me wasn't just the lights. It was how the air changed before they appeared, how the temperature dropped so fast like something had moved into that space and altered it, and how the lights didn't behave like anything I'd seen before. Not vehicles, not reflections, just there, hovering, waiting, until they left and everything went back to normal. Like that stretch of road had only been different for those few seconds while they were there. I started noticing it the fourth morning in a row. My name's Darren. I fish off a small stretch of coastline about 20 minutes from where I live. Nothing fancy, just a rocky edge with a narrow strip of sand and a decent drop-off not too far out. I go early before sunrise because it's quiet and you actually have a chance of catching something before the day crowds show up. That week, I'd been getting there around 5 a.m. Still dark, cold air coming off the water. Just me, the tide, and whatever you can hear in the distance. The first few mornings were normal. Then on the fourth, I saw the light. Out over the water. Low. Not high in the sky like a plane. Closer to the horizon. Bright, but not blinding. White with a slight yellow tint. I remember thinking it was a boat at first, but it didn't move, and it didn't flicker like a boat light would. Just a steady glow. I kept setting up my gear, glancing up at it every now and then, and it stayed in the same place the whole time. Didn't drift, didn't change brightness, didn't do anything. Eventually, as the sky started to lighten, it faded out, or maybe it just became harder to see against the daylight. I didn't think much of it. Next morning, it was there again. Same position, same brightness, same everything. That's when I started paying attention. I got there a bit earlier the third time. Still dark. The light was already there, exactly where I expected it to be. I stood there for a minute before even unpacking anything, just watching it, trying to figure out distance. But there was no reference point, just open water, no other boats nearby, no sounds. The sea was calm that morning, small, slow waves, nothing unusual except that light. I checked my phone, 052, looked back up, still there. I set up my rod, cast out, and kept watching it between everything else. It never changed, didn't blink, didn't dim, just hung there. By the time the sky started getting lighter, it faded again, same as before. I went home, still not really sure what I'd seen. Fourth morning, I decided to focus on it properly. Got there earlier than usual, maybe 4:45. Pitch dark. The light was already there, same place, like it had been waiting. I didn't even bother setting up straight away. Just stood there, hands in my pockets, watching it. The air felt still, no wind, the water barely moving. I noticed something else then, the sound, or lack of it. Usually you hear something, waves, distant birds, even the faint hum of something far out. That morning it felt quieter, not completely silent, just reduced, like the background noise had dropped. I stepped closer to the edge of the water. The light stayed fixed. I squinted, trying to see if there was any shape around it. There wasn't, just the light, no outline, no beam, nothing connecting it to anything. I checked the time again, 4:53. I stood there for a few more minutes, watching, waiting. Then it moved. Not fast, slow, almost unnoticeable at first. It started descending, straight down, no sideways drift, no wobble, just a steady drop toward the water. I felt my chest tighten a bit. I took a step forward without thinking. The light kept descending, same brightness, same color, no change in intensity. It got closer to the surface. I expected some reflection, some ripple, anything. There was none. The water stayed the same, dark, flat. The light reached the surface, and then it kept going, straight into the water. No splash, no ripple, no disturbance at all. It didn't even distort, just passed through the surface like it wasn't there. I stood there, staring at the spot where it disappeared, waiting for something to happen. A wave, a sound, anything. Nothing. The water remained completely normal, small waves moving in, just like before. I took a few steps along the shoreline, trying to see if maybe it had moved or reappeared somewhere else. It hadn't. The spot where it went under looked no different from anywhere else. I stood there for a long time, longer than I realized, watching the water, waiting. Eventually the sky started to lighten. The usual sounds came back, distant birds, the low rush of the tide. Everything felt normal again. I went home after that, didn't stay to fish. The next morning I went back, same time, same place. The light was there again, exactly where it had been before. Hovering over the water, like nothing had happened. I stood there, watching it, knowing what it was going to do, and when it started descending again, slow, steady, I found myself stepping back instead of forward. Watching it go under the surface again, without a sound, without a ripple, like the ocean wasn't really there, or like whatever it was moving through something else entirely. And we just happened to see the part right before it disappeared. I rented the cabin in northern Minnesota during the off-season because it was cheap and isolated. It sat beside a narrow lake surrounded by pine trees with only 2 other cabins nearby, both empty that week according to the owner. The place itself was small. 1 bedroom, wood stove, old screened porch facing the water. No cell service unless you drove 10 minutes back toward the highway. I got there on a rainy Thursday afternoon in late October. By midnight, the rain had stopped, but fog rolled in over the lake, thick enough that I couldn't see the opposite shoreline anymore. The temperature dropped hard, too. Every window in the cabin fogged slightly around the edges. I stayed up late reading near the wood stove while wind pushed softly through the trees outside. Nothing strange at first. Around maybe 4 in the morning, I woke suddenly without knowing why. The room looked brighter than before, not daylight bright, just faintly illuminated through the curtains facing the lake. At first, I thought maybe sunrise was starting early through the fog somehow. Then I checked the clock beside the bed. 4:07 a.m. Still completely dark outside. I sat there listening. No wind anymore. No tree movement. The cabin had gone dead quiet except for the occasional creak from cooling wood in the stove. The pale light behind the curtains remained steady. I remember immediately assuming somebody had driven up outside, maybe another renter or the owner checking something unexpectedly. But there was no sound of tires on gravel. No engine. Nothing. I got out of bed and walked to the window. The closer I got, the stranger the light looked through the curtains. Softer somehow, not harsh like headlights. I pulled one side of the curtain back slightly. There was a white glow hanging over the lake, maybe 30 or 40 feet above the water, completely silent. For a second, my brain tried turning it into something normal. Boat light, helicopter, reflection from another cabin. But it didn't fit any of those. The glow stayed perfectly still above the fog-covered lake, and the water beneath it looked wrong. That was the first thing that truly unsettled me. The light barely reflected on the lake surface at all. I could see faint brightness touching the fog around it, but the water below stayed dark except for a weak, blurred patch directly underneath, not even close to how light should have reflected. I stared long enough that my eyes started watering. The glow itself wasn't sharply defined, more like a pale sphere hidden behind mist. Sometimes it looked circular, other times stretched slightly taller. I checked the sky above it. Nothing. No stars visible through the cloud cover. No aircraft lights. I remember whispering, "What are you?" without meaning to. The second I spoke, the glow shifted sideways, very slowly, still silent. The movement made my stomach tighten immediately because it didn't drift naturally like fog or lantern light. It moved with purpose somehow. I backed away from the window, then stopped because something tapped softly against the porch screen outside. One tap, then another. I froze completely. The screened porch wrapped around the front of the cabin facing the lake. To reach it, something would have to cross directly past the windows first. Another soft tap came from outside. Metallic this time, like fingernails against aluminum screen framing. I moved carefully toward the front room without turning lights on. The cabin floor creaked under me louder than usual. When I reached the living room window, I looked through the porch screen toward the lake. The glow remained there. Closer now, maybe. Hard to judge distance over water and darkness. The fog around the lake looked brighter beneath it. Then I noticed something else. The porch floorboards were wet, not from rain leaking in. Individual damp footprints crossed the porch from left to right. I stared at them, trying to understand what I was seeing. Bare footprints, human-looking mostly, except oddly long. The toes appeared stretched somehow by water running across the wood grain. They ended near the porch steps leading outside. I remember becoming very aware then that the cabin door behind me was still locked. I checked it immediately anyway. Locked. Windows shut too. The footprints remained outside only. The glow over the lake drifted slightly lower. Then the tapping sound came again from farther down the porch. 3 slow taps. Tap, tap, tap. I looked toward the sound and saw movement near the porch corner. Not clearly. Just darker motion against darkness, like someone passing between fog and screen. I stepped backward immediately. The movement stopped. My heart was pounding hard enough I could hear it. I grabbed the fireplace poker from beside the stove, mostly because it was the only thing nearby. The glow outside dimmed slightly. At the same moment, all the sounds around the lake disappeared. I hadn't noticed frogs or insects earlier until they were gone. Even the tiny waves against shore stopped. The silence felt physical. Then came a low hum. Very faint. Not from the cabin, from outside over the lake. The glow brightened again while the humming continued, and suddenly I realized the fog wasn't moving around it naturally. It curled inward slightly toward the light. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it looked like the mist itself was being pulled. The wet footprints on the porch glistened faintly in the pale light. I kept staring at them because it grounded me somehow. They were physical. Real. Then one new footprint appeared near the porch steps. I didn't see something stuck there. The wet print simply darkened into visibility on the wood. Fresh. I backed into the kitchen immediately after that. Part of me wanted to turn every light on in the cabin. Another part felt terrified to make myself visible through the windows. The humming grew slightly louder. Cabinet glasses rattled softly. The clock on the microwave flickered once and reset to 12. Then everything stopped. The humming vanished. The glow outside remained steady. I forced myself back toward the window again because not looking somehow felt worse. Outside, the lake surface looked perfectly still now. Too still. The pale glow hovered maybe 20 feet above the water near the dock, and beneath it, something dark stood at the shoreline. At first, I thought it was a tree stump. Then the shape moved slightly sideways. Tall, thin, not enough detail to make out more than that. I remember gripping the poker so tightly my hand cramped. The shape remained near the dock facing the cabin. At least it felt like it was facing the cabin. Then the glow shifted upwards slightly, and the dark figure disappeared into the fog completely. Gone instantly. The glow stayed another few seconds. Then it moved out across the lake silently. Not fast, just smooth and level. The strange part was the water beneath it still refused to reflect properly. The lake stayed dark except for that faint blurred patch directly below. Eventually the glow dimmed enough that it blended into the fog entirely. Then nothing remained. No sound. No light. Just dark lake again. I stayed awake until sunrise, sitting in a kitchen chair holding the fireplace poker like an idiot. Every small cabin noise made me jump. Around 6:30, gray daylight finally started filtering through the windows. The lake looked normal again. Fog thinning. Cold wind returning through the trees. I convinced myself the footprints on the porch had probably belonged to me somehow from earlier rain. Then I opened the front door. The porch boards were covered in wet footprints. Dozens. They circled the cabin twice, not just the porch, the entire cabin. I followed them around the outside slowly. The prints stayed evenly spaced all the way through wet leaves and mud. Always barefoot, always slightly too long. And they never overlapped my own footprints from arriving earlier. Near the back wall of the cabin, the tracks passed directly beneath the bedroom window where I'd first seen the glow. Then they continued toward the lakeshore. I followed them all the way to the dock. The morning air smelled strongly of wet metal for some reason. The footprints crossed the dock boards clearly, then stopped halfway to the end. Not faded. Stopped. No return prints. Nothing in the water below except dark ripples moving gently against the posts. I stood there staring at the final footprint for a long time. Then I noticed something else. The wood around the last print was still wet, even though the rest of the dock had already started drying in the morning wind. The object went into the water during the worst part of the storm. I was out on Ashford Reservoir because I'd made the kind of dumb choice that feels reasonable at 5 in the morning and insane by noon. The forecast had said scattered showers, maybe thunder later, but nothing serious until evening. I'd been fishing that reservoir since I was a kid, and I knew the weather could turn fast in the valley. But the bass were moving, and I'd had 2 good weekends in a row. So I went. By the time I realized I should head in, the sky had already gone green-gray over the western ridge. The wind came across the water hard enough to slap spray over the bow of my little aluminum boat. I had one rod still out, a rain jacket half-zipped, and both hands on the trolling motor trying to keep the boat pointed toward the access ramp. Ashford wasn't huge, but in bad weather it felt a lot bigger. The far shore disappeared behind rain. The dam lights looked smeared and distant. Every sound flattened under the storm except the slap of water against the hull and the occasional crack of thunder rolling between the hills. I was maybe 200 yards from the ramp when the light appeared. At first I thought it was lightning reflecting in the water, but it didn't flash and vanish. It stayed there, low over the reservoir, maybe 30 or 40 feet above the surface. Pale yellow, almost white at the center. Not bright enough to light up the whole lake, but strong enough that the rain looked silver around it. It moved slowly against the wind. That was the first thing I couldn't make fit. Everything else on the water was getting pushed east. My boat, the chop, even leaves and sticks. This thing drifted west, smooth and steady, like the storm wasn't touching it. I killed the trolling motor without thinking. The boat turned sideways in the waves. Water slapped over the gunwale and soaked my boots. I grabbed the side to steady myself and kept staring. The light stopped over the deeper part of the reservoir, near the old flooded roadbed. I knew that spot well. If you had a fish finder, you could still see where the road dropped under, two faint lines of raised gravel crossing the bottom. The object hung there for a few seconds. Then the rain around it stopped. Not everywhere, just in a circle around the light. The storm kept hammering the water around me, but beneath the glow, the surface went smooth like a sheet of black glass. I remember saying, "What the hell?" out loud, but my voice sounded small and useless. The light sank. It didn't fall. It didn't splash. It lowered itself into the reservoir like it was going through a surface that wasn't water. The glow touched the black water, and the smooth circle widened. No steam, no ripple, no bubbling. Then it was gone. For maybe 3 seconds after, the water stayed flat in that circle. Then the storm filled it back in all at once. The waves started again. The rain hit. The wind shoved my boat sideways so hard I almost lost my footing. I got the motor going and headed for the ramp. The whole ride back, I kept looking over my shoulder. I expected the light to come back up. I expected something to float, a piece of metal, a buoy, anything. Nothing did. At the ramp, I had trouble getting the boat onto the trailer because my hands were shaking. A guy in a red pickup was parked under the trees, waiting out the storm. He watched me struggle for a minute, then came over and helped crank the winch. "You picked a hell of a morning," he said. "Yeah," I said. "You see anything out there?" He squinted toward the reservoir. Rain ran off the brim of his cap. "Like what?" I almost told him. Then I looked at the water and felt stupid. "Lightning," I said. He laughed. "Plenty of that." I drove home soaked and cold, with the heater on full blast and my wipers barely keeping up. My house was about 15 minutes from the reservoir, outside a small town in Western Virginia. I lived alone, worked maintenance for the county schools, fished when I could. Nothing complicated. I spent the rest of that day replaying what I'd seen. By evening, I'd convinced myself it had to be a drone. Maybe a weather balloon with a light, maybe some kind of emergency flare, something from the dam, something from the power company. But none of those explained how it went into the water without a splash. The next morning, I called the reservoir office. I didn't tell the whole story. I just said I'd been out during the storm and saw a bright object go into the water near the old roadbed. I asked if they'd lost equipment or if anyone had reported a flare. The woman on the phone got quiet. Then she asked my name. That bothered me, but I gave it. She asked what time. I told her around 11:30. She asked if I saw smoke, debris, or anyone else on the water. I said no. She said they'd make a note of it and thanked me for calling. That was it. 2 days later, the men came to my house. It was late afternoon, cold and damp after another day of rain. The yard was muddy and the creek behind my shed had risen enough that I could hear it from the kitchen. I was eating a sandwich over the sink when a car rolled into my driveway. I didn't hear it until the tires crunched on the gravel right outside the window. It was a black sedan. Not shiny exactly, but clean in a way that looked wrong against the mud. No dealer sticker, no visible plate on the front. The windows were dark and the car sat too level, like it didn't have suspension. 2 men got out. They both wore dark coats despite the wet air being more chilly than cold. One was tall and narrow, with a long face and dark hair combed flat against his head. The other was shorter, broader, with a rounder face and a soft smile that seemed to arrive before the rest of his expression. They walked to the porch without looking around. I wiped my hands and opened the door before they could knock. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to hear it. The taller one stopped with his hand raised. "Mr. Abel Norris?" he said. "Yeah." He lowered his hand slowly. "We're following up regarding an observation at Ashford Reservoir." I kept one hand on the door. "You with the reservoir office?" "In relation to it," the shorter man said. That wasn't an answer. "What do you want?" "To clarify a few details," the tall one said. "It won't take long." I didn't invite them in. They didn't ask. They just stood on the porch under the sagging awning while rainwater dripped from the gutter beside them. Their shoes were clean. Not just mostly clean, completely clean. No mud on the soles, even though my driveway was soft enough to leave boot prints. The tall man took out a small notebook. You reported a luminous object entering the reservoir during a storm. I reported something going into the water, I said. I don't know what it was. That's appropriate, he said, writing something down. The shorter one looked past me into the house. His eyes moved to my kitchen table, where I had a paper map of the reservoir unfolded because I'd been trying to mark where it happened. You identified the old roadbed, he said. I didn't like that. I fish there. Yes, he said, frequently. How would you know that? The tall man smiled faintly. Patterns are useful. I almost closed the door then, but I wanted answers more than I wanted them gone. What was it? I asked. Neither of them reacted. The shorter man said, we're more interested in what happened afterward. Afterward? The water, the tall one said. Did it respond normally afterward? I stared at him. What does that mean? He wrote something before I answered, which made my skin tighten. Did the surface behavior resume naturally? He asked. It was a storm, I said. The waves came back. How quickly? I don't know. A few seconds. The shorter man looked disappointed. Not dramatic, just a small lowering of his eyelids, a tiny shift in his mouth. The tall one asked, no sustained calm? No. No separation? What? No visible boundary between affected and unaffected water? I thought of the flat circle under the light, black, smooth, untouched by rain. For a few seconds, I said. He wrote that down fast. The shorter man asked, any odor? No. Metallic taste? No. Pressure in your ears? I hesitated, because there had been something. Not during the sighting, but afterward, while I was hauling the boat onto the trailer. My ears had popped twice, and I thought it was from clenching my jaw in the cold. The shorter man saw the hesitation. Brief pressure, he said. I guess, I said. The tall one wrote it down. They asked whether my watch stopped, whether my phone lost power, whether the fish finder gave unusual readings. I told them I hadn't even turned the fish finder on because of the storm. The shorter man looked annoyed by that too, like I'd failed to collect data for them. Did you see fish after the event? He asked. No, I was trying not to drown. The tall one's pen paused. The shorter man smiled politely. Of course. The rain strengthened. Water drummed on the awning above them. Neither man blinked much. I noticed that after a minute and couldn't stop noticing. Their eyes stayed open too long, wet-looking but still. I said, look, if something hazardous went into the reservoir, people need to know. The taller man nodded. They will if it becomes necessary. If what becomes necessary? Notification. That's not what I asked. No, he said, it wasn't. The shorter man looked toward the road, not at the car, past it toward the line of trees beyond my mailbox. Has anyone else contacted you? He asked. No. Have you posted about it? No. Have you told family? No. Why not? I looked at him. Because it sounds insane. He seemed satisfied with that. Good, he said. That helps. Something moved inside the sedan. I glanced over his shoulder. For a second, I thought there was a third person in the back seat. Just a pale shape behind the glass, upright and still. Then the shorter man shifted slightly, blocking my view. The tall one said, you should avoid the reservoir for several days. I have a fishing tournament Saturday. No, the shorter man said. Not, you shouldn't. Not, we advise against it. Just no. I felt irritation cut through the fear. You don't get to tell me where to fish. The tall man looked at me with something close to pity. We can't tell you anything. We can only document what you do next. That was worse than a threat. I asked for their names. The tall one said, Mr. Hale. The shorter one said, Mr. Porter. No first names, no agency, no cards. I asked for ID. Mr. Hale reached into his coat, then stopped. He looked at Mr. Porter. Mr. Porter gave a tiny shake of his head. Hale smiled. Identification would complicate the record. I laughed once because it was that or yell. You two are really bad at sounding official. Porter's smile widened slightly. We're not official. Hale closed the notebook. We appreciate your cooperation, he said. I didn't cooperate. You answered? You answered. Before leaving, Porter paused at the porch steps. He turned back to me and asked very casually, have the fish started surfacing yet? I didn't answer. He nodded like my silence was enough. Then they walked to the sedan. The car had a rear plate, I noticed then, but it was blank. Not missing, not covered. A smooth white rectangle where numbers should have been. They got in, no engine sound, no reverse lights, The sedan rolled backward down the driveway, turned onto the road, and disappeared behind the rain. I stood on the porch until my socks got damp from windblown water. That night, I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of water. Not rain. Rain had stopped hours earlier. This was lapping. Soft, steady, close. I got out of bed and walked through the dark house following it. The sound seemed to come from the kitchen, then the mudroom, then the back door. When I opened the door, the yard was quiet. The creek behind the shed was running high, but not unusually. No water near the house. No smell except wet leaves. Then I noticed my fishing boots by the back step. They were full of water, both of them. Filled to the top, perfectly still, reflecting the porch light. I dumped them out and went back inside. The next morning, I drove to Ashford. I didn't take the boat. I told myself I just wanted to look from the dam. The sky was clear, bright and cold, and the reservoir looked normal from the overlook. Gray-blue water, a few gulls, a state maintenance truck parked near the spillway. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then I saw the first fish, a largemouth bass, maybe 3 pounds, that floating belly up near the rocks below me. Then another, then 3 more near the intake tower. I walked down the path to the shoreline. The closer I got, the more I saw. Bluegill, crappie, shad, all floating still in the little coves, their pale bellies catching the morning light. Not everywhere. That was the strange part. Only in a wide arc near the old roadbed. I called the reservoir office again from the parking lot. Told them there was a fish kill. The same woman answered. When I gave my name, she got quiet. She said they already knew. I asked who reported it. She didn't answer. By afternoon, the county had closed the east access ramp. The official explanation was low oxygen after storm turnover. That happens in reservoirs sometimes. Fish die, water gets weird, people move on. But old Ray Muller, who'd fished Ashford longer than anyone, told me he'd never seen a kill like that after a cold rain. Wrong season, he said. Wrong water. 2 days later, I found a dead fish in my driveway. It was a crappie, stiff and dry, lying behind my truck, like someone had placed it there. Ashford was 15 minutes away. No animals had chewed it. No mud on it. No smell. There was a small round mark behind its gill, black at the edges. I shoveled it into a trash bag and drove it to the dump. For the next week, I saw the black sedan twice. Once outside the grocery store, parked across the lot with nobody inside. Once near the reservoir gate, sitting half hidden behind a line of pines. Both times, when I looked again, it was gone. I stayed away from Ashford for almost a month. When I finally went back, it was early morning and calm. No storm, no strange light. Just mist rising off the water and a heron standing near the reeds. I launched the boat because I was tired of being scared of a place I'd known my whole life. Out near the old roadbed, my trolling motor cut out. The water around the boat went flat. I mean perfectly flat. The rest of the reservoir had small ripples from the breeze, but around me there was a smooth circle maybe 30 feet wide. My boat stopped rocking. The air felt thick. I reached for the ignition. Before I touched it, something bumped the bottom of the hull. Not hard, just one dull tap, then another. I looked over the side. Fish were gathering under the boat. Dozens of them. Bass, bluegill, carp, all just below the surface, facing the same direction. Not feeding, not circling, facing down, like something beneath them had their attention. I didn't wait. I grabbed the paddle and moved until the trolling motor kicked back on. The flat circle broke behind me with a soft slap, and the wind hit the boat again. At the ramp, my truck started on the second try. A folded note was tucked under the windshield wiper. The paper was dry, even though mist covered the glass. It said, "Water response delayed. Thank you for confirming." I drove home without the boat tied down properly and had to pull over twice to fix the strap. That evening, just after sunset, the landline rang. I hadn't used that phone in years. It came with the house, and I only kept it plugged in because my cell service was bad. I answered without thinking. For a few seconds, there was only a low hum, like wind over a bottle. Then Mr. Porter's voice said, "Mr. Norris, please avoid eating anything caught from Ashford." I didn't say anything. He added, "For now." The line clicked dead. I unplugged the phone. I haven't fished Ashford since. Sometimes I drive past the reservoir on my way into town. Most days it looks normal. Boats on the water, kids at the picnic tables, gulls over the dam. But if the sky is dark and the wind comes over the ridge the right way, I can see the old roadbed area from the highway. There's always one patch of water that looks smoother than the rest. I noticed the compass before I noticed anything in the sky. I was about halfway along a ridge trail in the San Juan Mountains, a little outside Silverton. It was late afternoon, maybe around 6:30, and the sun was already dropping behind the peaks. The air was cooler up there, thin and dry, with that faint metallic smell you sometimes get in high elevation. I'd hiked that trail before. Not often, but enough to know it well. The ridge runs narrow for a stretch, with a steep drop on one side and a gradual slope on the other. The path itself is easy to follow, just packed dirt and loose rock. I had my phone out because I was checking how much farther I had to go before turning back. That's when I noticed the compass. It wasn't pointing straight north. Not exactly. It was off by just a little. At first, I thought it was just calibration. Phones do that sometimes. I held it flat, moved it in a figure eight, tried to reset it. The needle steadied, but it didn't correct. It stayed slightly off, not spinning, not erratic, just wrong. I frowned and looked around. There was nothing nearby that should interfere with it. No metal structures, no power lines, just rock, dirt, and scattered trees lower down the slope. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. A few steps later, I felt something else. A faint pressure. Not in my ears exactly, more like in my head. Like the moment before a headache, but without the pain. I stopped and stood still. The wind had died down. The ridge felt unusually quiet. I reached for my phone again and checked the compass. Still off. Same slight angle. I turned my body slowly, watching the needle. It responded to my movement, but it never lined up perfectly. Always just a few degrees off. I looked up at the horizon. The sun was nearly gone now, just a faint glow behind the mountains. The sky above it was darker, shifting toward blue-gray. That's when I saw it. A dim glow just above the horizon line. It was faint enough that I almost missed it. Not bright like a light source, more like a soft patch of illumination in the air. I stood there, staring at it. The glow didn't spread, didn't move. It just sat there, hovering above the distant peaks. I tried to tell myself it was the last of the sunlight catching something. A cloud, maybe. But there weren't any clouds. The sky had been clear all afternoon. I took a step forward. The gravel shifted under my boot. The glow stayed in place. Then it pulsed, just once. A brief increase in brightness. Not sharp, not sudden. More like it swelled slightly, then returned to its original dim state. I felt that pressure in my head again, stronger this time. I swallowed, trying to clear it. It didn't help. I looked down at my phone. The compass needle had moved. Not much, but more off than before. I turned slowly, watching it. The needle lagged behind my movement for a second, then caught up, but it still didn't settle correctly. I looked back up at the glow. It hadn't moved. The color was hard to pin down. Not white, not yellow. Something in between, but muted. Like it was being filtered through something. The air around me felt still. Too still. No wind, no sound. Even the faint rustle of leaves from below the ridge had stopped. I took another step forward. The glow didn't react. I waited. Nothing changed. Then, slowly, it began to fade. Not disappearing all at once, just becoming less noticeable. Like my eyes were losing the ability to see it. Within a few seconds, it was gone. The horizon looked normal again, just the dark outline of mountains against the sky. I stood there for a moment, trying to process it. Then I looked down at my phone again. The compass needle snapped back to normal, perfectly aligned. I turned in a full circle. It stayed steady, exactly where it should be. The pressure in my head eased, not instantly, but gradually. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. The wind picked up again, lightly brushing against my jacket. I could hear it moving through the trees below. Everything felt normal. I checked the time, 7:02 p.m. That made me pause. I was sure it had been closer to 6:40 when I first noticed the compass. It didn't feel like I'd been standing there that long. I tried to think back. How long I'd been watching the glow, how long the needle had been off. It didn't add up. I stood there for another minute looking out over the horizon. Nothing else appeared. No light, no movement, just the fading twilight. Eventually, I turned around and started heading back down the trail. The path felt familiar again, solid under my feet. But every few steps, I found myself checking my phone, watching the compass, making sure it stayed aligned. It did, all the way down. When I reached my car at the trailhead, I sat there for a minute before starting the engine. I pulled my phone out one more time. The compass was still steady, pointing exactly north. I set it down on the passenger seat and looked up at the ridge. The sky above it was completely dark now. No glow, no movement. But for a second, I thought I saw something faint, a small shift in the darkness above the horizon. Then, it was gone.